Eleanor Whitfield did not scream when her father pushed her onto that porch in front of the whole town. She just stopped breathing, stopped feeling. Stood there in the August heat, while men she had cooked for, sewed for, and smiled at her whole life, looked at her the way they looked at livestock at auction. 25 years old, and already being sold. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to this channel, follow every part until the end, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning it happened, Eleanor had already been awake for 3 hours. She had started the fire before dawn, the way she always did. She had boiled the water, sliced the salt pork, fried the cornbread in the cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her mother. She had carried her father's breakfast plate to the table without being asked, poured his coffee without spilling a drop, and stood quietly by the window while he ate without looking at her once. That was the morning of August the 14th, 1883. That was the morning Walter Whitfield decided his daughter's life was worth $40 and a handshake. Eleanor did not know it yet. She was still watching the dust rise off Dust Creek's main road, thinking about the garden she had been trying to start behind the trading post. Thinking about whether the tomato seedlings would survive another week without rain. Small thoughts. Safe thoughts. The kind of thoughts a woman clings to when larger thoughts feel too dangerous to carry. Eleanor. Her father's voice came out flat and hard, the way it always did when he had already made up his mind about something. She turned from the window. Walter Whitfield was a big man gone soft. Broad shoulders that used to mean something now rounded and heavy with years of drinking and poor decisions. His beard was unkempt. His eyes, when they landed on her, had the particular coldness of a man who looked at a problem and saw only the cost of it. "Get your good dress on," he said. "The blue one your mother left you." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not alarm, not yet. Just that quiet, familiar dread that had lived in her stomach since she was 12 years old. "Why?" she asked. "Because I said so." He pushed back from the table. "Be out front in an hour." He walked out without another word. The screen door slapped shut behind him. Eleanor stood in the kitchen for a long moment, her hands still warm from the skillet. The cornbread she had made sat untouched on her father's plate. She looked at it. Then she went to put on the blue dress. The crowd had already gathered by the time she stepped onto the porch. That was the first thing that told her something was wrong. Not the heat. August in Wyoming was always brutal, the air thick and still, the sun pressing down like a flat iron on everything it touched. Not the noise. Dust Creek was a loud town on its best days, full of men with opinions and horses with bad tempers. What told her was the way people were looking. At her. She recognized most of the faces. Ben Kassler from the dry goods store, who bought flour from her father every week and always made a point of checking Eleanor's arithmetic twice, as if a woman couldn't add. Mabel Trent, who ran the boarding house and had once told Eleanor that she would have been pretty if she hadn't inherited her mother's stubbornness. Reverend Poole, standing at the edge of the crowd with his hat in his hands and his eyes pointed carefully at the ground. They all knew. Whatever this was, they all already knew. Eleanor stopped walking. She was at the top of the porch steps, one hand on the railing, the August sun hitting the side of her face hard enough to make her squint. She looked out at the crowd. The crowd looked back at her. Nobody said a word. Then her father stepped forward from among the men gathered near the hitching post, and Eleanor understood that whatever she had feared for the past hour was not large enough. She hadn't feared enough. She had not let herself. Walter Whitfield cleared his throat and addressed the crowd with the confidence of a man who believed he was doing something entirely reasonable. "Folks," he said, "as most of you know, I'm carrying debts I can't cover. The trading post is mortgaged. I got notes due in Cheyenne and a creditor coming next month who ain't interested in payment plans." He paused. "My daughter Eleanor is 25 years old, unmarried, no prospects, and I can't keep feeding a woman who brings nothing into this household." Eleanor heard the words. She heard every single one of them. But they seemed to arrive from a great distance, like sounds carried across a canyon, distorted by the space between them. "I'm offering a marriage contract," Walter continued. "Any man willing to pay her debts and take her off my hands gets a legal agreement signed and witnessed. She's healthy, She's a hard worker. She can cook, sew, and run a household. I'm asking $60 and the assumption of my note at the bank." Silence. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a man laughed. It was not a mean laugh exactly. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when something is so absurd that the body doesn't know what else to do with it. But it spread. A ripple of amusement moved through the gathering, low and humiliating, and Eleanor felt it the way you feel cold water closing over your head. She did not move. She did not cry. She held the porch railing and kept her face as still as she could make it, because the only thing she had left in that moment, the only thing they could not take from her, was the choice to not let them see her break. "60's high for a woman nobody's wanted in 25 years, called Ben Kasler, grinning. More laughter. "I'll take her for 20, someone shouted from the back. "Make it 30 and throw in the horse," called another. Eleanor looked at Reverend Poole. He was still staring at the ground. Then Harrison Cole stepped forward and the laughter stopped. Harrison Cole was not a man. People laughed around. He owned the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, a ranch house with glass windows and a parlor piano, and more political influence than the territorial governor cared to admit. He was 51 years old, twice widowed, and carried himself with the particular arrogance of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. He looked at Eleanor the way he would look at a piece of land he was considering purchasing. Calculating, appraising, entirely without warmth. "I'll pay the 60, he said, "and I'll clear the banknote." Walter Whitfield's face flooded with relief. "Harrison, that's a generous—" "I'm not finished." Cole moved toward the porch steps. "I'll also want the trading post building in the arrangement. Given that it's mortgaged anyway, I consider that fair compensation for taking on the liability of the girl." He reached the bottom step and looked up at Eleanor. He had pale gray eyes the color of old ice. "You'll do well enough," he said to her, as if she were not a person being spoken to, but a thing being assessed. "I need someone to manage the household. My last wife wasn't strong. You look like you've got more constitution." Eleanor's hand tightened on the railing. She thought about her mother's blue dress that she was wearing. She thought about the garden behind the trading post, the tomato seedlings, whether they would survive. She thought about the fact that she had been awake since before dawn, cooking a breakfast her father did not eat, and now he was selling the building she had worked in for 15 years along with her. She opened her mouth. "No," she said. The word came out quiet, steady, like she had practiced it though she hadn't. Harrison Cole blinked. He looked genuinely startled, not offended, yet just startled the way a man is startled when a door he expected to open doesn't. "Excuse me," he said. "I said no." Eleanor let go of the railing and stood straight. "I'm not a piece of property. I'm not a note at the bank. I'm not a liability. And I'm not going anywhere with you." The silence that followed was different from the laughing silence. This was the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. Walter Whitfield's face went from relieved to furious in the space of a breath. "Eleanor." "You don't have the right," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word, just slightly, just enough to remind her that she was terrified. But she kept going. "You don't have the legal right. I'm a grown woman. You can sell the building. You can sell every stick of furniture in it. But you cannot sell me." Harrison Cole's expression had shifted. The startled look was gone. In its place was something colder and considerably more dangerous. "Your father has legal authority." "My father has a drinking problem and a mortgage," Eleanor said. "That doesn't make me his inventory." Cole stepped up one step. His hand came out and closed around her forearm, not violently but firmly, with the casually assumed ownership of a man who had simply decided something was already his. "Let's not make a scene," he said quietly. "Come down off that porch and we'll get this settled like reasonable people." Eleanor pulled her arm back. He tightened his grip. "I said, take your hand off her." The voice came from behind the crowd. Low, unhurried. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to carry. Every head turned. At the far end of the street, a rider had stopped. The horse was dust gray and trail-worn, and the man on it was leaning forward slightly, with his forearms resting on the saddle horn, relaxed as a man watching a card game. which was what made him immediately more unsettling than if he had been tense. Howe was tall in the saddle. Dark hat, dark vest, a sun-worn face that was hard to read from a distance. He swung down from the horse in one easy motion and wrapped the reins around the hitching post at the end of the street. Then he started walking toward the crowd. People moved out of his way. Not because he pushed them, he didn't. They just moved, the way water moves around something solid. He walked through the center of the crowd and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, 7 feet from Harrison Cole. "I believe," the man said, looking at Cole with a calm that somehow made the words hit harder than shouting would have, "that the lady asked you to let go." Cole released Eleanor's arm. Not because he wanted to, she could see that. He released it because something in the other man's stillness communicated that this was a moment where consequences were being quietly arranged. "Who the hell are you?" Cole said. "Name's Caleb Walker." He didn't offer a hand. He just looked. "I've been on the road 3 weeks coming down from the northern range, so I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have much patience left for nonsense." He tilted his head slightly. "And this looks like about as much nonsense as I've seen in a good while." Walter Whitfield pushed forward. "Now listen here. This is a private business arrangement. I heard what kind of arrangement it is." Caleb's eyes moved to Walter, and something in the look made the older man go quiet. "You're selling your daughter in the street like a mule at auction." A pause. "Sounds like a personal failing I wouldn't be bragging about." The crowd had gone completely still. Harrison Cole squared his shoulders. "This doesn't concern you, Walker. Move on." Caleb did not move. He looked at Cole with the patient expression of a man who has made a decision and sees no reason to explain it further. "What's the number?" he said. Cole blinked. "What? The number your man is asking." Caleb nodded toward Walter. "What's the price?" Walter Whitfield, whose brain was catching up slowly to what was happening, said, $60, and the assumption, "I'll pay $60, Caleb said. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Cole's jaw tightened. "I've already agreed to—" "You agreed to take something that wasn't being offered freely." Caleb turned and reached into the saddlebag he'd pulled from his horse when he came through the crowd. Eleanor hadn't even noticed him carrying it. He drew out a leather pouch and held it up. "This is $63 in earned wages. Miners' camp up near Laramie." He looked at Walter. "I'll pay her father's debt." Walter's eyes had gone to the pouch with a hunger that Eleanor recognized and hated herself for recognizing. "Now just a minute," Cole said. His voice had gone very controlled, the way a man's voice goes when he is working very hard to remain civilized. "You can't just walk into a business transaction." "I'm not buying her," Caleb said. Everyone stopped. He looked directly at Eleanor for the first time, and she felt the look land differently than any look had landed on her in years. He wasn't assessing her. He wasn't calculating. He was looking. Just looking the way you look at a person. "I'm paying the debt," he said, "because a debt is what's being used to trap her. Once the debt is paid, there is no contract. There is no arrangement. There is no transaction." He looked back at Walter. "Your note gets cleared. This man's money," he glanced at Cole, "goes back in his pocket. And your daughter goes where she chooses." Walter Whitfield stared at the money pouch. Eleanor watched him do the math. The note cleared the pressure, lifted the debt gone. She watched him choose it. She watched him choose the money over every other consideration, which was the most honest thing her father had ever done in its way. "All right," Walter said. "Papa." Eleanor's voice came out barely above a whisper. He didn't look at her. Harrison Cole stood very still for a moment. Then he adjusted his coat, straightened his hat, and turned to the crowd. "This isn't finished," he said, and his voice was the temperature of creek water in January. He walked away. The crowd began to break apart slowly. The way crowds do when the event they came to watch has ended in a way they didn't expect. Men drifted back to their businesses. A few women murmured to each other behind their hands. Ben Kassler from the dry goods store met. Eleanor's eyes briefly looked away and went inside. Reverend Poole finally looked up. He met her gaze. His expression was complicated and ashamed. She looked away first. Caleb had gone to speak with her father in a low voice, the transaction being settled quietly. She watched him from the porch, this stranger who had walked out of the crowd and rearranged everything. He was younger than she'd first thought, mid-30s maybe. The lines on his face were from weather and sun, not age. He moved with an economy of motion that made every gesture feel deliberate. He handed her father the money pouch. He did not look triumphant. He did not look charitable in that particular way that made charity feel like humiliation. He looked like a man who had done a thing that needed doing. When he turned back to Eleanor, he stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I believe you made your feelings about being sold pretty clear. The faintest thing, not quite a smile, but close. Good for you." Eleanor's throat was very tight. "I have a ranch up in the northern valley," Caleb continued. "I'm riding back that way starting tomorrow at dawn. If you want to come, you're welcome to it. I need a capable person to help me sort out the place. It's been empty 4 months while I was working the mining camps, and I expect it's in some state." He paused. "It's honest work. Your own space, your own terms." He reached up and adjusted his hat. "If you'd rather go somewhere else, I'll give you the fare for the stage to Cheyenne, or wherever you're heading. But that's your call, not mine." He said it the way you say something that is simply a fact. Not a favor, not a performance. Just a thing being offered because it was available and she might need it. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. Behind her inside the trading post, she heard her father moving around. She heard the clink of the money pouch being counted. She looked at the street at the town that had stood in this heat and watched her be auctioned and laughed about it, and then wandered away to tend their own business. She looked back at the man standing at the bottom of the porch steps. "Who taught you," she said, "to do a thing like that?" Caleb considered the question. "Nobody," he said. "My father was the kind of man who wouldn't have. I suppose I decided that was a reason to be different, not a reason to be the same." Eleanor came down the steps. She stopped 1 step above him, so they were nearly eye level, and she looked at him directly. "My terms," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I work. I don't take charity." "I understand. And if I decide I want to leave?" "Then you leave," he said. "No argument. That's the deal." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she nodded once. "I'll need tonight to pack what I have," she said. "And I want to take the seedlings from the garden." Caleb blinked. "The seedlings?" "Tomatoes." She held his look steadily. "I started them in May, and they're not ready to die yet, just because my situation changed." A slow exhale. Something moved in his expression. It was very brief, but Eleanor caught it. "All right," he said. "Bring the seedlings." Eleanor did not sleep that night. She moved through the rooms of the trading post in the dark, choosing what to take and what to leave behind. Her mother's hairbrush. The small book of poetry she'd kept hidden at the back of the kitchen shelf for 6 years. 3 dresses, the most practical of the 4 she owned. The tin box where she kept her sewing kit. The things that were hers, the things that had always been hers, that had managed to stay that way through everything. She wrapped the tomato seedlings carefully in damp cloth and packed them in a wooden box she found behind the counter. Her father sat in the main room through most of the night, not speaking, the money pouch on the table in front of him. At some point after midnight, Eleanor came through the room with her packed bag, and he looked up. "Eleanor." "Don't," she said. Not angry, not pleading, just final. She walked past him and waited for morning on the porch. Caleb arrived at dawn with 2 horses and no particular expression. He loaded her bag without asking permission, tied it to the second horse, and held the animal steady while she mounted. He did it the way he seemed to do everything efficiently, without ceremony, without making her feel that she owed him something for it. They rode out of Dust Creek as the sun came over the hills. Eleanor did not look back. She had told herself she wouldn't, and she didn't. And later, she would think that was probably the most important decision she had made that whole week. Not to turn around and see the town that had tried to sell her standing in its morning dust looking after her. Because if she had looked back, she might have felt something that pulled at her. Regret. Grief. The terrible gravity of the familiar. Instead, she looked at the road ahead, the brown grass going gold in the early light, the mountains showing themselves against the sky, blue and enormous and indifferent in the way that mountains are, which Eleanor had always found weirdly comforting. After an hour of silence, Caleb said, "You can ask questions if you have them." Eleanor considered this. "How long have you had the ranch?" she said. 4 years. "What kind of cattle?" "Mixed herd. About 40 head when I left. Could be more now if they've run the fence properly." He paused. "I had a man watching it while I was gone. Good man. He'll have kept things together." "What made you leave for the mining camps?" "A beat. Needed money. The ranch isn't profitable yet, it's still building. The cattle take time." "So you spent months in the mines," Eleanor said, "and when you finally had the money, you gave it all away." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I'll earn more," he said. Eleanor looked at the side of his face. He was watching the road. "That was everything you had," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And you did it for a woman you'd never seen before in your life." "I did it because it was wrong," he said. "What was happening to you? It was just wrong." He glanced at her briefly. "That doesn't require much more justification than that in my experience." Eleanor turned back to the road. The mountains got larger as they rode. The air shifted cooler, thinner, cleaner. The world opened up in a way that felt nothing like Dust Creek, nothing like the Trading Post kitchen, nothing like 15 years of making herself useful to people who treated usefulness as a given. She thought about the tomato seedlings wrapped in damp cloth in the wooden box tied to her horse's saddlebag. She thought about the way Caleb Walker had stood at the bottom of those porch steps and looked at her, not through her, not at her as inventory, not with pity. Just looked. As if she were a person. As if that were the obvious thing to do. "I didn't thank you," Eleanor said. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said. "I want to." He glanced at her again. "Thank you, Mr. Walker," Eleanor said, "for standing up when nobody else did. I won't forget it." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Caleb," he said. "Pardon. Just Caleb." He turned his eyes back to the road. "Mr. Walker's my father's name, and he and I didn't part on good terms." Eleanor absorbed this. The road unwound ahead of them. The mountains waited vast and patient. "All right," she said. "Caleb." And they rode on toward the high country, where the August sun was warm rather than punishing, and the air smelled of pine and distance. And Eleanor Whitfield, for the first time in 25 years, did not know exactly what was going to happen next. She was discovering 1 mile at a time that this did not feel like falling. It felt strangely terrifyingly like waking up. They rode for 3 days before Eleanor stopped flinching every time a branch cracked in the trees. She hadn't realized she was doing it until the second afternoon, when a dead limb fell somewhere in the pines above the trail, and she grabbed the saddle horn hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Caleb didn't say anything. He just let his horse slow its pace until hers matched it, and they rode the rest of that stretch side by side, instead of single file, and Eleanor understood that he had noticed and had chosen to respond without making her feel watched. That was the thing she kept noticing about him. The choosing. Most people in Eleanor's experience responded to discomfort by either ignoring it or pointing it out, both of which left the uncomfortable person more alone than before. Caleb did neither. He responded the way you respond when you've spent enough time in genuine silence to understand what other people actually need, which is usually just the knowledge that someone is nearby without the weight of owing them a reaction. They camped the first night at a dry creek bed, the second in a shallow valley where the grass was still green despite the August heat. Caleb cooked without ceremony, salt pork and hardtack and coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, and Eleanor ate without complaint, which seemed to satisfy him. On the second night, she unpacked the tomato seedlings and checked the cloth wrapping. 2 of the 7 had not survived the journey. She pulled them out and set them aside and rewrapped the remaining 5. "Still got 5?" she said mostly to herself. "5's a good number," Caleb said from across the fire. She looked up. He was looking at the coffee pot, not at her. "You know anything about growing tomatoes?" she asked. "Not much," he said. I know they need water, and they die if you leave them in the dark too long." He paused. "Seems like they've got something in common with most living things." Eleanor looked at the 5 wrapped seedlings and then back at the fire. "Where'd you learn to talk like that?" she said. He glanced at her. "Like what?" "Like everything you say means 2 things at once." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother read a lot. She used to say that a person who only says what they mean at the surface level isn't really talking. They're just making sounds." "She sounds like she was something," Eleanor said. "She was." He looked back at the fire. "She died when I was 19, winter fever." "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." But the way he said it, flat and careful, the way you say something you've had to learn to say without your voice breaking, told Eleanor that a long time ago and over with were 2 different things, and he knew it as well as she did. She didn't push. She wrapped the seedlings back up and set them gently in their box, and they sat with the fire between them and the night around them, and it was the most comfortable Eleanor had felt in longer than she could accurately remember. Chang. On the 3rd morning, the trail climbed. Eleanor felt it in her legs and her back, and in the changed quality of the air, which was thinner and cooler, and smelled like something she didn't have a word for. Something clean and sharp that seemed to reach further into her lungs than lowland air ever had. Her horse picked its way up the rocky path without complaint, which she respected. "We're close," Caleb said. "How close? 2 hours, maybe less." She nodded and adjusted in the saddle, and looked at the land unfolding on either side of them. She wasn't going to think about what she was riding toward. She'd done enough imagining in the last 3 days, tried to picture what a ranch looked like when it had been empty for 4 months. What a man's home looked like when he'd been sleeping in mining camps all summer. Whether she'd made a colossal mistake, and whether that mistake was reversible, and how far the nearest town was if she needed to reconsider. The answer to that last question, as it turned out, was about 14 miles. She found this out from Tom Briggs, the man Caleb had left watching the ranch, who was sitting on the porch with a rifle across his knees when they rode into the yard, and who stood up the moment he saw Caleb and broke into a grin wide enough to embarrass most people. "Hell's bells," Tom Briggs said. "I was starting to think you'd gotten yourself buried up there." "Almost," Caleb said, swinging down. "How's the herd?" 43 head. Lost one to a cougar back in June, gained 4 calves. Fence on the east pasture needs work. I patched it twice, but the posts are rotted." Tom's eyes had moved to Eleanor, not with anything unfriendly, just with the frank curiosity of a man who wasn't expecting company. "I didn't know you were bringing someone back." "Tom Briggs, Eleanor Whitfield." Caleb tied his horse. "Miss Whitfield will be staying and working the ranch. I'd appreciate if you'd help get her settled." Tom looked at Eleanor with straightforward respect, which she felt like a small gift. "Ma'am, you've been traveling 3 days." 3 days, Eleanor confirmed. "Then you'll want the guest room, and I'll get water on." He was already moving. "Caleb, you owe me 2 months' wages and an explanation, and I'm collecting both tonight." Jaw. The ranch house was modest and serious the way practical things often are. Eleanor walked through it, while the men were outside with the horses learning its layout. The way she'd always learned rooms, by what was where, by what was missing, by what the arrangement of things said about the person who lived in them. What she learned. Caleb Walker owned very little that wasn't functional. 1 shelf of books, a Bible, a book on cattle management, 2 novels with cracked spines that had been read and reread. A table with 4 chairs, though it was clear only one was used regularly. A kitchen that was clean but bare, set up for efficiency rather than comfort. A second bedroom at the back of the house that had a window facing east, and a wooden floor that had been swept recently, which told her that Tom Briggs was a man who took his caretaking seriously. She set her bag down on the bed in the east-facing room and looked out the window. From here she could see the back of the property, the fence line, the far pasture going gold in the afternoon light, the mountains beyond it, enormous and permanent. For the first time in 3 days, Eleanor sat down. Not because she was tired exactly, though she was, but because she needed a moment where no one was watching her, no one was waiting for her reaction, no one needed anything from her. She sat on the edge of the bed in the east-facing room and put her hands in her lap and just breathed. She had been sold. Her own father had stood in a public street and announced her worthlessness to anyone who'd listen. A man with ice-colored eyes had grabbed her arm and called it business. And then a stranger had walked out of the crowd with 3 weeks' wages and rearranged everything. The ordinary mind, Eleanor thought, would find this terrifying. And it was. She wasn't pretending it wasn't. But underneath the terror was something else. Something that had not been there before. Something that felt, if she pressed carefully at it, almost like ground. She was here because she had chosen to be. That was different from every other place she had ever been. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs and breathed again, and then she stood up and went to find out what needed doing. What needed doing, as it turned out, was considerable. The kitchen garden behind the house had gone mostly to weeds, which Tom Briggs apologized for with genuine regret. "I kept up the animals," he said, "but vegetables aren't my particular skill set, I'm afraid." The cabin's main room needed proper cleaning, and one of the windows had a cracked pane that had been letting in weather. The smokehouse needed clearing. The root cellar was well stocked for winter, which was at least something. Eleanor made a mental list of everything in order of urgency. Then she made a shorter list of the things she could do that afternoon before the light went. Then she went and did them. She was pulling weeds from the kitchen garden efficiently, methodically, without particular emotional investment when Caleb found her there an hour later. She heard him stop at the garden gate. She didn't look up. "You don't have to start today," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to. You've been traveling 3 days." "I'm aware." She pulled another handful of weeds. "Standing still makes me anxious. Always has." A pause. "Fair enough." He came through the gate and crouched down at the far end of the row and started pulling weeds alongside her. Eleanor looked at him sideways. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said, mimicking her tone, just enough to make the point, without making it a joke. She caught the edge of it and felt something shift in her chest, not unpleasantly. They worked without talking for a while. The evening light was coming low and golden through the fence posts. A cow bellowed somewhere in the far pasture. An owl that had no business being awake this early was making its preliminary noises in the tree line. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said. "Yes. What did Tom mean when he said he wanted an explanation about me?" Caleb stopped pulling for a second. Then continued. "Tom knows I've been alone since I came out here. He's protective. He'll want to understand the situation." "And what is the situation?" Eleanor asked. "I'd like to know how you're describing it." "I'm describing it as a woman is in a bad circumstance. I had resources that could help, and she is working here in exchange for wages and board." He looked at her steadily. "That's the truth. That's what I'll say." "Some people will think differently," Eleanor said. "A woman living on a man's ranch, no family, no chaperone." "Some people think wrong," Caleb said simply. "That doesn't stop them from saying it." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." He looked at her. "Does that concern you enough to change your mind about staying?" Eleanor considered the question seriously because it deserved serious consideration. "No," she said. "Then let them say it," Caleb said, and went back to pulling weeds. Tom Briggs did not think wrong. He had supper on the table by the time they came in from the garden, salt pork and beans and cornbread that was genuinely good, which surprised Eleanor and delighted her in a way she didn't try to hide. Tom," she said after the first bite, "who taught you to make cornbread like this?" Tom Briggs was a small, wiry man of about 50, with a deeply sun-creased face and the particular dignity of someone who had worked hard his entire life and didn't feel the need to explain it to anyone. He looked pleased in a quiet way. "My grandmother," he said. "She had opinions about cornmeal." "She was right," Eleanor said. "This is better than mine." "I doubt that," Tom said, but he was smiling. Caleb watched this exchange with something in his expression that Eleanor couldn't entirely read. It wasn't surprise exactly. More like a person watching two things fit together that he'd hoped would, but hadn't been certain about. After supper, Tom settled in his chair by the stove and pulled out his pipe and looked at Caleb. "So," he said. Caleb told him what had happened in Dust Creek. All of it without editorializing. Tom listened without interrupting, which Eleanor appreciated. She had expected questions or expressions of opinion. But Tom Briggs apparently understood that some stories required the courtesy of uninterrupted listening. When Caleb finished, Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I've worked for Caleb 4 years. He is, in my considered opinion, one of the few genuinely decent men I have encountered in a fairly long life." He paused. "But I want to ask you directly, are you all right? Not whether you're safe, I can see you're safe. But are you all right?" Eleanor held his gaze. She thought about what honest answer looked like. "I'm better than I was," she said. "I don't know yet what all right feels like, but I think I'm moving toward it." Tom nodded slowly, as if this were a perfectly satisfactory answer. "Good enough," he said. "Good enough." Tom Briggs left 2 mornings later to return to his own place in the valley, and Eleanor stood on the porch and watched his horse go down the trail until the trees took him, and then it was just her and Caleb and 43 head of cattle and 4 months of backlogged work and 5 tomato seedlings in a wooden box that needed planting. She planted them that afternoon in a corner of the kitchen garden with good sun exposure and enough distance from the other plants that they wouldn't compete for water. Caleb watched from the fence while she worked, not hovering, just present. She had started to learn the difference with him. The way his presence felt different from supervision. "Where'd you get them?" he asked. "The seedlings." "Started them in May," she said. "From seeds my mother kept. She used to grow them every year." Eleanor pressed the soil firm around the last plant. "She died 4 years ago. I kept the seeds in a tin box in the kitchen. I almost left them when I packed, and then I thought—" She paused. "I thought they were the only thing in that house that was actually mine, so I took them." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Good decision," he said. Eleanor sat back on her heels and looked at the row of small green plants in the dark soil. "They may not survive," she said. "The transplant, the altitude change. I don't know if this soil is right for them." "Might not," Caleb agreed. "But they've got a better chance here than wrapped in damp cloth in a saddlebag." Eleanor looked up at him. "Is that another one of those things that means 2 things at once?" she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him, and it changed his face considerably, made it younger, made it warmer, made it the face of a person rather than a position. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." The week settled into a shape. Eleanor rose before dawn and started the fire. She couldn't seem to break that habit, and in the end, she didn't particularly try. She cooked breakfast, and they ate without formality side by side at the work table, talking through what needed doing that day. Then they split off into their separate tasks and came back together at midday and again at supper. And the rhythm of it was so different from the rhythm of the trading post that it took Eleanor almost 2 weeks to stop waiting for something to go wrong. She learned the ranch. Learned it the way she'd learned every other environment she'd lived in, by observation, by asking the right questions, by working until she understood what she was looking at. The cattle were a mixed herd, mostly longhorns, with some shorter horn breeding mixed in. The fence on the east pasture was in worse shape than Tom had made it sound, not just the posts, but a whole section of wire that had rusted through and been held together with what appeared to be determination and twine. The smokehouse needed new stones in the firebox. The root cellar was well organized, but running low on salt, which was going to be a problem come autumn. Caleb worked from before dawn until after dark, and Eleanor matched him. She didn't announce this as a choice, she just did it, and he noticed without commenting, which was the correct response. On the 11th day, the east fence went down. She heard the cattle before she saw them, the particular bawling of animals that have discovered freedom and aren't sure what to do with it. She ran out of the house and across the east pasture in her work boots, which were already proving the best decision she'd made in months, and found 6 steers standing at the downed section of fence, looking both pleased with themselves and mildly confused. Caleb was already there trying to work the wire back into place with his bare hands, which was not going well. "Don't," Eleanor said. "You'll shred your hands. Where are the fencing pliers?" "Tack room." Stay with them." She was already running. She got the pliers and the extra wire coiled in the corner and a pair of work gloves and got back to the fence in time to find Caleb had managed to keep the 6 steers from wandering further, mostly through a combination of arm waving and sheer stubbornness. "Hold that section," Eleanor said, pulling on the gloves. "No, that section, the one that still got tension, hold it right there." "Miss Whitfield, you don't have to. I have been watching you build fence for 11 days, she said, clipping the old wire back. "I know how to do this. Hold still." He held still. She worked fast, pulling the new wire taut, crimping it at the post, working her way along the break. Her hands ached. The wire was stubborn. The sun was squarely overhead, and the back of her neck was burning. She didn't stop. When the last crimp was set, she stepped back and pulled off the gloves. Caleb was looking at the repaired section with an expression she couldn't quite classify. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. "Same place I learned everything," Eleanor said. "I watched and I figured it out and I did it." She looked at the steers, who had decided the grass on this side of the fence was adequate, and settled back to grazing. "You should get better posts before October. The ones on this section are rotting at the base." "I know," Caleb said. "Do you want me to put together a list of what needs doing before winter?" He looked at her. "Do you want to?" "I already have one," she said. "In my head. I've been keeping it since the second day." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'd like to see it." "Good." She picked up the fencing pliers and the leftover wire. "Come find me after supper." She walked back across the pasture toward the house, and she did not look back because she didn't need to. She could feel his gaze on her back, the way you feel the first warmth of a fire when you've been cold for a long time, not burning, not demanding. Just there, just steady. The list, when she wrote it out for him after supper, covered 2 pages. Caleb read it in silence. She watched him read the way she'd taken to watching him in small moments, not obviously, not in a way that invited conversation about the watching, just paying attention, the way you pay attention to something you're still figuring out. He got to the 3rd item on the 2nd page and looked up. "You listed the window pane," he said. "It's letting in weather." "I know. I've been meaning to fix it for 3 months." "I know," Eleanor said. "That's why it's on the list." Something shifted in his expression. "You're not wrong." He looked back down, read to the bottom, folded the pages, set them on the table. "This is good work," he said. "Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. The specific quality of acknowledgement that comes from one competent person to another." Eleanor had not felt recognized for competence in so long that the sensation was briefly disorienting. She took a breath and steadied herself. "I want to talk about wages," she said. He looked at her. "All right. You said honest work at honest pay. I want to know what that number is." "What do you think it's worth?" he said. "I think you should tell me what you were going to pay a hired man if you'd brought one back from the camps," she said. "And then I think you should pay me that, because the work I'm doing is the same work." Caleb held her gaze for a long moment. $20 a month, he said. "That's what I paid the last man." "Then that's what I want," Eleanor said. "Done," he said. "No argument, no negotiation, just done." Eleanor had been prepared for negotiation. She had rehearsed several responses in her head during the walk from the east pasture, varying in degree of firmness. The absence of resistance left her briefly without a script. "Just like that," she said. "You're doing the work," Caleb said. "It'd be dishonest to pay you less for it because you're a woman. And I've got no interest in being dishonest." He picked up his coffee cup. "Do you want something in writing?" "Yes," she said. "Then I'll write it tomorrow morning." Eleanor looked at him across the table. This man who had given away 3 weeks of mining wages for a stranger's freedom, who fixed fences without ceremony, who cooked salt pork and called it supper without apology, who read her list of winter preparations without defensiveness, without making her feel she'd overstepped. "You're a strange man, Caleb Walker," she said. "I've been told," he said. "Usually not as a compliment." "I mean it as one," she said. The fire in the stove ticked quietly. Outside, a wind had come up from the north, pulling at the eaves of the cabin. Caleb refilled his coffee cup and offered her the pot. She held out her cup. They sat like that for a while longer. Two people finding the particular shape that two people make when they are learning carefully, and without hurry, how to trust each other. It was not love yet. Eleanor was not confused about that. But it was something. Something that required tending. Something she was cautious with the way she was cautious with the tomato seedlings. Understanding that fragile things could grow into sturdy things if you paid the right kind of attention. She would pay attention. What she had not paid enough attention to was Harrison Cole. She should have known. She had known in the part of her mind she'd been carefully not consulting since leaving Dust Creek that a man like Harrison Cole did not accept a public refusal in front of his neighbors and simply adjust his plans accordingly. Men like Harrison Cole did not have the mechanism for that. What they had instead was patience and resources, and the particular determination of someone who has never genuinely faced consequence. The letter arrived on a Thursday 3 weeks after Eleanor had come to the ranch. A rider from the Valley Post brought it a young man she didn't recognize, who handed over the envelope without meeting her eyes and turned his horse around without collecting a response. The letter was addressed to Caleb Walker. Eleanor brought it inside and set it on the table and went back to the bread she was making because it wasn't her letter to open, and she understood that about herself, that the temptation to read it was information about her anxiety level rather than information about appropriate behavior. Caleb came in at midday, saw the letter, looked at it, picked it up. He read it standing at the table. Eleanor watched his face. His expression did not change. That was the thing she had learned to watch for the specific quality of stillness he got when something mattered, and he was deciding how much to show. He set the letter down and looked at her. "Cole has filed a claim on your father's property," he said. "The trading post building and the lot. He's arguing that the transaction we conducted wasn't valid because Walter Whitfield's debts exceeded the value of the money I paid, and therefore his prior agreement with Cole has legal precedence." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. "He's claiming the building. He's claiming the building." Caleb paused. "And he's claiming that since you were part of the original arrangement, your failure to fulfill that arrangement constitutes breach of contract." The air in the room had changed. Eleanor felt it the way you feel weather coming, a pressure shift, a difference in the quality of the silence. "He's saying he owns me," she said flatly. "He's saying he has a legal claim." Caleb's voice was controlled. "Which is different. But his lawyer is arguing it in a way that amounts to the same thing." He picked up the letter again. "He's asking the territorial court to compel your return to Dust Creek to resolve the matter." Eleanor sat down in the chair at the table. She pressed her palms flat on the wood the way she'd pressed them on her thighs on the day she'd arrived, and she breathed, and she thought. "He can't actually compel that," she said. "I'm not property. The law in the territories is complicated," Caleb said. "And Harrison Cole has the ear of people who interpret it." He set the letter down again. "He's not going to win this in a fair court, but a fair court isn't guaranteed." Eleanor looked at the letter on the table, then at Caleb. "What do you want to do?" she asked. He looked at her with that direct, unhurried look she had come to recognize as the look he gave a thing when he was being honest about it. "I want to ride to Dust Creek," he said. "Find the territorial commissioner's office and make very clear that what Cole is attempting is not only legally questionable, but personally unacceptable." He paused. "But what I want doesn't matter much compared to what you want. This is about you." Eleanor thought about Dust Creek, the crowd in the August heat, her father's face when he chose the money, Harrison Cole's ice-colored eyes, and the particular confidence of a man who believed possession was the natural order of things. She thought about the tomato seedlings in the kitchen garden, which had put out 3 new leaves since she'd planted them. She thought about the written agreement in the drawer of this table, $20 a month, honest work, and how it had felt to watch Caleb Walker write her name at the top of it without hesitation. "We ride to Dust Creek," she said. "Together," Caleb said. "Together," Eleanor said. "I'm not sending someone else to speak for me. I've had enough of that." Caleb picked up the letter from the table, folded it carefully, and put it in his shirt pocket. "We leave at dawn," he said. Eleanor looked at the bread she'd been making, still unfinished on the board. She got up and went back to it because it needed to be done before they left, and letting something half-finished sit wasn't a habit she intended to start now. Caleb watched her for a moment. "You're not scared," he said. She pressed her hands into the dough. "I'm scared," she said. "I just don't see how being scared changes what needs doing." He was quiet. "My mother used to say that," he said finally. Eleanor looked up. "She sounds like she was very wise," she said. "She was," Caleb said. "You'd have liked each other." He said it simply without apparent awareness of how much weight the words carried, the particular intimacy of being compared favorably to someone a person loved and lost. Eleanor held the words quietly, the way you hold something you aren't ready to put down yet, but also aren't ready to examine closely. She went back to the bread. Outside, the wind was still coming from the north, and the mountains beyond the fence were turning the particular blue-gray color they turned in the late afternoon when a change was moving in from the high country, and Eleanor Whitfield, who had left Dust Creek as a woman, the town had tried to discard, was riding back into it at dawn as something the town had not yet seen, and Harrison Cole, with his ice-colored eyes and his lawyer's letter and his absolute certainty that he had already won this, did not know that yet. They rode out before the sun was fully up, and Eleanor did not look back at the ranch the way she hadn't looked back at Dust Creek. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had decided that looking back was a habit she was finished with. The ride took the better part of 2 days. They didn't talk much the first morning, which suited Eleanor. She was working through things in her head, constructing and dismantling arguments, trying to anticipate what Harrison Cole's lawyer would say, and what she would say back, trying to remember everything she knew about her father's debts, and when they had started, and what the original numbers were. Her mother had kept ledgers. Meticulous, precise dated ledgers that went back 12 years. Eleanor had helped her keep them from the time she was 14. She thought about those ledgers for the better part of 30 miles. "You've gone quiet," Caleb said somewhere past midday. "I'm thinking," Eleanor said, "about my mother's ledgers." She shifted in the saddle. She kept records of every transaction the trading post ever made, every debt incurred, every payment made, every date. She was precise about money, about documentation. "Where are they?" Caleb asked. "In the trading post, in the back room, in a wooden chest under the window." Eleanor paused. "If my father hasn't burned them, or sold them, or let them rot." Caleb was quiet for a moment. If those ledgers show what the debts actually were when they started, what Cole might have already claimed against them, they'd show whether Cole's claim has any legitimate basis, Eleanor said, or whether he's fabricated the numbers to give his lawyer something to work with. She could feel him thinking alongside her, not talking over it, not taking it from her, just thinking in the same direction. "We'd need to get to them before Cole's people do," he said. "I know that. And your father may not let us in. I know that too." Eleanor looked at the road ahead. "My father will do whatever seems most advantageous to my father. That's the most reliable thing about him. If we can make it clear that cooperating with us is more advantageous than cooperating with Cole." "You're going to negotiate with your father." "I'm going to talk to my father," she said. "There's a difference. Negotiating implies I think he has something worth bargaining for. Talking means I'll say what's true, and he can decide what to do with it." Caleb looked at her sideways. "Eleanor Whitfield," he said quietly, "I would not want to be Harrison Cole right now." She didn't smile, but she felt the remark land somewhere warm. They came into Dust Creek on the second afternoon, and the town looked smaller than Eleanor remembered. She didn't know why that surprised her. It was the same collection of buildings on the same dusty street. The trading post at the far end, the dry goods store, the boarding house, the livery stable, the saloon that had been called the Silver Spur for as long as anyone could remember. All of it exactly as she'd left it. But from the back of a horse, having spent weeks in open mountain country, it looked contracted, pressed in, like a place that had decided how large it was going to be and then stopped. People noticed them. She felt it the way attention moves through a small town like water through a pipe, fast and directional. Heads turned in doorways. A woman hanging washing in the yard behind the boarding house went still. Ben Castler from the dry goods store appeared in his window and then disappeared again. Eleanor kept her chin up and her eyes on the trading post. "They're looking," Caleb said low. "Let them," she said. She said it the way he had said it 3 weeks ago in the kitchen garden, and she felt him notice the echo of it, felt it in the slight change in his posture beside her. They tied the horses at the hitching post in front of the trading post. Eleanor was down before Caleb had finished securing his reins, and she was already at the front door before he caught up with her. She didn't wait for him. She opened the door and walked in. The trading post was dim and smelled the way it had always smelled, wood and dust, and the faint undersmell of the turpentine her father kept behind the counter. Walter Whitfield was there behind that counter, and he looked up when the door opened and went several shades paler when he saw his daughter. "Eleanor." His voice was careful, the voice of a man calibrating. "Papa." She stopped in front of the counter. "I need the ledgers." He blinked. Whatever he'd expected her to say, it wasn't that. "The ledgers. Mama's ledgers. In the wooden chest in the back room. All of them going back 12 years. She held his gaze. "I need them today." Walter's eyes moved to Caleb, who had come in behind her and was standing just inside the door, with his hat in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. "What's this about?" Walter said. "You know what it's about," Eleanor said. "Harrison Cole has filed a legal claim using your debts as the foundation, which means your debts are now my business, whether either of us likes it." Walter's jaw tightened. "Cole's lawyer says the deal with Walker here wasn't." "Cole's lawyer says whatever Cole pays him to say," Eleanor said. "Mama's ledgers will show what the actual debt numbers are, what was owed to whom and when. If Cole has inflated the figures or misrepresented the terms, the ledgers will prove it." She leaned forward slightly on the counter. "You want this off your back as much as I do. Give me the ledgers." Walter Whitfield looked at his daughter for a long moment. This woman he had publicly offered for sale 6 weeks ago, who was standing in his store now with the posture of someone who had walked through something and come out harder on the other side. "He'll make trouble for me," Walter said, "if I hand those over." "He's already making trouble for you," Eleanor said. "The difference is whether you're making it easier for him or harder." A silence. Then Walter Whitfield came out from behind the counter and went through the back door without another word. They heard him moving boxes, the scrape of the chest across the floor. Caleb moved to stand beside Eleanor. "That went—" "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't say it went well yet." He stopped. He understood she could see it, that she was managing something fragile here, and the managing required concentration. Walter came back carrying 3 ledger books, their cloth covers faded, the spines cracked from years of use. He set them on the counter. Eleanor pulled the first one toward her and opened it. Her mother's handwriting. Small and precise and utterly legible. Every entry dated, every sum written twice, what was owed and what was paid. She felt the grief hit her the way grief sometimes does, sideways, and suddenly when you aren't braced for it. She pressed it down. "The most recent 2 years will be the ones that matter," she said mostly to herself. "Take all 3, Walter said. She looked up at him. Her father was looking at the ledgers with an expression she didn't see on him. Often something complicated, regret threaded through the self-interest that was his more usual mode. He didn't apologize. He wasn't built for it. But he said, "Your mother worked hard on those." "I know," Eleanor said. "I helped her." She picked up all 3 ledgers and turned toward the door. "Eleanor." Her father's voice stopped. She waited. "Cole's man was here yesterday, asking about you, where you'd gone, who with." She turned back. "What did you tell him?" Walter met her eyes. "I told him I didn't know." It was, she understood, the closest thing to protection he was capable of. She held it for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "and meant it in the specific way you mean a small thing from someone who has mostly given you nothing." She walked out with the ledgers, and Caleb followed her, and behind them, the door of the trading post swung shut. The Territorial Commissioner's office was a two-room building 3 streets over from the main road, marked with a hand-lettered sign that had faded to near illegibility in the summer heat. The commissioner himself was a man named Gerald Pate, thin, precise, 45 years old, with the particular wariness of a bureaucrat in an underfunded territory who had learned not to make enemies of wealthy ranchers if he could avoid it. He was not pleased to see them. Eleanor could read it in the way he sat forward in his chair when they came in, the way his eyes went to Caleb, and then to her, and then to the ledgers in her arms, and she watched him do the internal calculation that men like Gerald Pate were always doing: which side of this is going to cost me less? "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I was wondering when you'd come in." "Then you know why I am here," she said. She set the ledgers on his desk without asking permission. "Harrison Cole has filed a claim against property and against my person using my father's debts as legal basis. I have documentation of those debts, what they actually were when they were incurred, and what amounts were settled. If Cole's lawyer has represented different figures to this office, these ledgers will show the discrepancy." Pate looked at the ledgers, then at Eleanor, then at Caleb. "Mr. Walker," he said, "you're the one who paid the sum in question." "I am," Caleb said. "Cole's position is that the sum was insufficient to clear the obligation and that his prior agreement with Mr. Whitfield therefore stands." "Cole's position," Eleanor said before Caleb could answer, "requires that the obligation be larger than it was. These ledgers will tell us whether it is." She held Pat's gaze. "Open them." Pate blinked. He was not accustomed, Eleanor sensed, to being told what to do by a woman in his office. But there was something in her voice, not aggression, not anger, just an absolute certainty about the ground she was standing on, that made him reach out and open the top ledger. She guided him to the relevant pages. The entries from 1880 through 1883, her mother's hand recording every transaction. The banknote, the original sum, the payments made, the interest accrued. The actual remaining balance as of the date her mother had last updated it 3 months before she died. The actual remaining balance was $47. Caleb had paid $63. Pate stared at the numbers. Eleanor watched him stare. "Cole's lawyer submitted a figure of $112, Pate said slowly. The room went very quiet. "Then someone," Eleanor said carefully, "added $65 to a debt that didn't belong to them." She paused. "I'd like to know who and when and how that figure ended up in a legal filing with this office." Gerald Pate looked like a man who had just discovered he was standing considerably closer to the edge of something than he had realized. "I'll need to—" He stopped, started again. "This will require verification." "Verify it," Eleanor said. "The ledger entries are dated and signed in my mother's hand. She's been dead 4 years, and her handwriting hasn't changed since. You're welcome to find a document examiner if you need confirmation." She straightened. "In the meantime, I'd like to know whether this office intends to enforce a legal compulsion based on fabricated numbers." "Nobody said fabricated. What would you call doubling a debt in a legal filing?" Eleanor said. Pate had no good answer for that. She watched him not have one, watched him try on several expressions and find none of them adequate. It was Caleb who spoke next, and he did it quietly with the same unhurried certainty he'd had at the bottom of the porch steps the day all of this started. "Mr. Pate," he said, "Miss Whitfield is not asking for anything unreasonable. She's asking for accurate accounting and honest process. If this office can provide that, there's no further problem. If this office can't—" He paused. "The Territorial Court in Cheyenne will be interested in a filing that contains numbers $65 higher than the documented reality." Pate looked between them. Then he reached for his pen. What happened next took 3 hours and felt like 3 years. Pate sent a messenger to Cole's. The lawyer arrived, a compact man named Aldrich, with carefully pressed clothes and the nervous energy of someone who had recently become aware that his client had put him in a difficult position. He reviewed the ledgers. He asked to see them again. He conferred with Pate in a low voice in the corner of the room, while Eleanor and Caleb sat in the 2 chairs against the wall and waited. Eleanor was very still during the waiting. She had used up her confrontational energy on the entry into the room, and now she was simply holding position, which was its own kind of work. Caleb sat beside her with his hat on his knee and his eyes forward, and his presence steady and even, and she felt it the way she kept feeling his presence like something she hadn't known she needed and was trying not to need too much because need was a thing that had gotten her into trouble before. After an hour, Aldrich approached them. "The filing will be amended," he said. "The figure was an error." "An error," Eleanor said. "A clerical error, in the compilation of Mr. Cole's documentation." Aldrich's voice was flat and careful. "The corrected figure given Mr. Walker's payment would show the debt as settled. And the claim on my person." Aldrich cleared his throat. "Under territorial law, a marriage contract requires the explicit consent of both parties. Without documented consent from Miss Whitfield, which doesn't exist," Eleanor said. "Which does not appear to exist in the documentation. Because it doesn't exist," Eleanor said again, patient and final. "Not as a guess, not as an omission. It doesn't exist because I never consented, and I never consented because I was not asked." Aldrich looked at his papers. "The claim regarding Miss Whitfield's person will be withdrawn." The silence after he said it was different from all the other silences in that room. Eleanor breathed. Just breathed. In through the nose, out slowly, the way you breathe when something enormous has been resting on your chest and has just finally moved. Caleb's hand resting on his knee shifted half an inch toward her. Not touching, just moved. She felt it in her peripheral vision and understood what it was, and felt something in her chest answer it quietly and without drama. "I'll need that in writing," she said to Aldrich. "Today." They had the written withdrawal by late afternoon. Eleanor held it for a moment outside the commissioner's office, this piece of paper that said in formal language that she was no one's claim. That she was not a debt, not a contract, not an outstanding obligation. She held it and felt the weight of it, the ordinary, extraordinary weight of a document that simply stated what should always have been true. Then Harrison Cole found them. She should have expected it. She had expected it somewhere in the back of her mind, which was why she felt something tighten in her when she heard his voice from across the street, that cold, controlled voice that had said, "Take her off my hands," like she was furniture, like she was an inconvenience in someone else's ledger. Miss Whitfield, how was coming from the direction of the saloon. He had 2 men with him, ranch hands from the look of them, broad and deliberate. He stopped in the middle of the street. His ice-colored eyes went to the paper in her hand. "I see Aldrich found a way to accommodate you," he said. "Aldrich found a way to accommodate the law," Eleanor said. "Those aren't always the same thing in my experience, but today they were." Cole's expression didn't change. That was the thing about him that was most frightening. Not anger, not violence, just the absolute absence of adjustment. He looked at obstacles with the patience of a man who fully expected them to eventually become irrelevant. "You know this isn't over," he said. "I'm aware you believe that," Eleanor said. "I'm not a man who forgets debts." "The legal debt is settled," she said. "The ledgers confirm it. The commissioner's office has the documentation. Whatever you think you're owed." She held his gaze. "It was never legitimate, and you knew that when you filed the claim." Cole's eyes moved to Caleb standing one step to Eleanor's left, the particular measuring look of one man assessing another. "Interfering in other men's business is a dangerous hobby, Walker," he said. "I reckon it is," Caleb agreed pleasantly. "I seem to keep doing it anyway." One of the ranch hands shifted, just slightly, just enough. Caleb's eyes moved to him briefly and without apparent concern, and the man stopped shifting. Cole looked back at Eleanor. "You're making an enemy of the wrong man," he said. "Mr. Cole," Eleanor said, and her voice was steady as the mountains she'd been living next to for the past weeks, steady in that particular way that things are steady when they have stopped being afraid of the thing in front of them. "You tried to purchase me in a public street. You filed a legal claim using falsified debt figures. You sent men to ask my father where I'd gone." She stepped forward one step. "You've been making an enemy of me since August. I think we're both clear on where we stand." Silence. Harrison Cole looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression, not defeat, nothing so clean as that. but a recalibration. The kind a man does when he has accurately assessed, possibly for the first time, that he has miscalculated the nature of what he is dealing with. He turned and walked back toward the saloon. His men followed. Not watch them go. She turned back to Caleb. I was looking at her with that expression. She still couldn't fully classify the one that was almost a smile, the one that made his face younger and warmer and more human than his default expression. "You all right?" he said. "I'm fine," she said. And then, because it was true, and she was trying to be honest about true things, "My hands are shaking." He looked at her hands. They were, just slightly, the aftershock of adrenaline finding its way out through her fingertips. "That's normal," he said. "I know it's normal," she said. "It's still annoying." He almost smiled again, the same almost smile as before, and this time it lasted half a second longer than it had in the kitchen garden. "Hungry," he said. "Starving," she said. "There's a place on the next street that makes decent pie. I know the woman who runs it. She'll give us a table and not ask questions." Eleanor exhaled. "Lead the way." The woman who ran the pie shop was named Clara Howell, and she was 60 years old with the kind of face that had been beautiful and had not bothered to pretend otherwise as it aged, which made it more interesting. She looked at Caleb when they came in, and then at Eleanor, and then back at Caleb. "Well," she said, "you've been gone long enough." "Been working," Caleb said. "Clara, this is Eleanor Whitfield." Clara Howell looked at Eleanor with direct, uncomplicated assessment. "You're Walter's girl." "I am," Eleanor said. "I knew your mother." Clara's expression shifted, not quite warmth, but something adjacent to it, the particular regard of someone remembering a person they respected. "Good woman. Better than her situation." "Yes," Eleanor said. "She was." Clara brought them pie-apple with a crust that justified the establishment's existence entirely, and coffee and a corner table away from the window, and she left them alone, which Eleanor understood was itself a kind of kindness in a town this small. They ate in the easy silence that had developed between them over weeks of shared meals. The shaking in Eleanor's hands had stopped. The pie was good. The coffee was strong. Outside, Dust Creek went about its afternoon business, and from inside the pie shop it looked perfectly ordinary, which Eleanor found mildly astonishing, given what the morning had contained. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Caleb set down his fork. "Yes." Cole said, "This isn't over." She looked at her coffee cup. "Do you think he was telling the truth?" Caleb considered this. Cole is the kind of man who means what he says when he says it. Whether he has the capacity to follow through is a different question. He paused. "I think he'll be more careful now. The filing is amended. The documentation is public. If he comes at you again, he's doing it without legal cover." Another pause. "That doesn't mean he won't come at you. It means it'll be harder for him to dress it up as something else." Eleanor absorbed this. "Then we need to be ready," she said. "We do," Caleb agreed. She looked up at him. The word had been sitting on the table between them since he'd said it. We, and neither of them had acknowledged it, but it was there, solid and unambiguous as the coffee cups. "You've lost a lot because of me," she said. "Your wages, 3 weeks of writing, a morning in a commissioner's office." "I haven't lost anything I needed," Caleb said. "That's not Eleanor." He said her name quietly. Not sharply, he didn't do things sharply. Just with enough weight that she stopped. "I spent 4 months in a mining camp earning money. I didn't particularly want, so I could come back to a ranch I was building for no very specific reason." He picked up his coffee cup. "I think it's possible that the specific reason turned out to be something I hadn't anticipated." She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. "That's either the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me," Eleanor said carefully, "or I'm reading something into it that isn't there." Caleb looked up. "You're not reading something into it that isn't there," he said. The afternoon light, through the pie shop's small window, had gone golden. The way afternoon light goes when summer is starting to remember that it won't last forever. Eleanor sat with what he'd said, held it the way she'd held her mother's ledgers that morning, with recognition, and something that felt like grief, and something that felt like gratitude, and something she didn't have a name for yet. I'm not... She stopped, started again because she owed it to both of them to be honest. I'm not ready, for whatever that is. She held his gaze. I spent 25 years in a house where I didn't have the right to want things for myself. I'm still learning what wanting things feels like. I don't want to mistake gratitude for something it isn't. Caleb nodded, once, slowly. That's fair, he said. And honest. And I'm not asking for anything. I know you're not. I'm just... He paused, seeming to choose the words carefully. I'm just being clear about where I stand, so you know. So it's not a thing you have to guess at. He set down the cup. Whatever you decide whenever you decide it, that doesn't change anything about the ranch or the work or the arrangement. That's separate. Eleanor looked at this man who had given away his wages, who had fixed fences, and read her winter list without defensiveness, who had stood in a commissioner's office and said the word "we" as naturally as breathing. I know, she said. She stopped. That's part of what makes this complicated. Clara Howell appeared at their table with the coffee pot and refilled both cups without asking. She looked at neither of them directly, which was a social skill Eleanor would have liked to study formally. More pie, Clara said. Please, Caleb said. Clara brought more pie. Outside the sun was dropping. Somewhere down the street, a door banged open, and a man's voice rose briefly and dropped again. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary western town that had just this morning contained something extraordinary and had no idea. They were leaving Clara Howell's shop when the boy found them. He was maybe 12 years old, thin and quick-footed, and he stopped in front of them on the boardwalk with a piece of paper folded in his hand, and the expression of someone who has been paid to deliver something and is uncertain about what happens afterward. Mr. Walker, he said. That's me, Caleb said. The boy held out the paper. Man asked me to give you this. Big man. Gray eyes. Said it was important. Caleb took the paper. The boy was already gone, vanished into the alley beside Clara's shop, quick as thought. Eleanor watched Caleb open the note. She watched his face. The stillness came back, the specific stillness that meant something mattered. He handed her the note. It was short. 4 lines. Written in a precise hand she didn't recognize, but the signature at the bottom she did. Harrison Cole. What was taken from me will be returned. Legal channels have been closed. Other channels have not. The woman should understand that isolation has consequences. The ranch is a long way from anywhere. Eleanor read it twice. Then she handed it back to Caleb. He's threatening the ranch, she said. He's threatening you, Caleb said. The ranch is what he's using. She looked at him. The shaking had come back to her hands. She pressed them together, not hiding it, just managing it the way you manage a thing when you decide to be honest about it instead of pretending it isn't happening. I won't be run off, she said. The words came out quiet and absolutely certain. Not by him, not by anyone. I know, Caleb said. We go back tomorrow, she said. And we need a plan before we do. I was already nodding. Not because she had convinced him, she could see that he'd arrived at the same place on his own. He nodded the way 2 people nod when they've reached the same point by different roads. Tonight we stay in town, he said. Clara can put us up, she's got rooms. Tomorrow we ride back with everything we know. He folded the note and put it in his pocket beside the earlier letter. And we stop along the way at Tom Briggs's place. Tom, Eleanor said. He knows that country better than anyone. He knows Cole's operations, his land, his patterns. Caleb looked at her directly. And he'll want to know. He cares about that ranch. He'll want to help. Eleanor thought about Tom Briggs at the supper table, asking her if she was all right, not whether she was safe, but whether she was all right. She thought about the cornbread with her grandmother's recipe. She thought about the way he'd looked at the ledger-covered table and understood without being told that what was happening in front of him was something worth helping with. We get Tom, she said. And then we deal with Harrison Cole, Caleb said. On our ground, on our terms. Eleanor looked at the note in his pocket. She thought about everything that had brought her to this street on this afternoon. Her father's voice in the August heat. the crowd's laughter, the ice-colored eyes. $63 and a horse named something she'd never asked, and 5 tomato seedlings wrapped in damp cloth. She thought about the east-facing room and the kitchen garden, and $20 a month and a written agreement with her name at the top. She thought about what was hers now. "Our terms," she said. "That's right." And they turned together away from the place that had tried to discard her and walked toward what needed doing next. Clara Howell gave them 2 rooms above the pie shop without asking questions, which Eleanor was grateful for in a way she didn't have the words to express properly. She lay on the narrow bed in the dark for a long time that night, the withdrawal document on the table beside her, Cole's note folded inside her jacket pocket, because she wanted to keep it close, not out of fear, but because she had decided that knowing exactly what you were dealing with was always better than pretending it wasn't there. She thought about the ranch, the east-facing window, the kitchen garden with the 5 tomato seedlings that had, as of 3 days ago, put out 7 new leaves between them. She thought about 43 head of cattle and a fence that needed better posts before October, and a smokehouse with a firebox that still needed new stones and a root cellar running low on salt. She thought about all the things that were hers now, in the specific way that things become yours, not through ownership, but through work and intention and the choice to stay. Cole's note sat against her ribs, and she pressed her hand flat against it through the jacket fabric and thought, not this time. Not this. She was up before dawn. Caleb was already in the street when she came down, both horses saddled and waiting. He had coffee in a tin cup that he handed to her without comment. The way he handed her things, without making the handing into something that required a response beyond acceptance. She accepted it. Drank. The morning was cool, and the street was empty, and Dust Creek looked in the pre-dawn gray like a sketch of itself. All outlines, and no detail which suited Eleanor fine, because the details were not things she wanted to linger on. "Sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. "You? Enough." They rode out as the first edge of light came up behind the eastern hills, and Eleanor did not look back at the boarding house or the trading post, or the street where her life had been offered to the highest bidder on a hot August morning. She looked at the road and thought about what came next. They reached Tom Briggs's place by late morning. Tom came out of his barn when he heard the horses, and his face went through several things in quick succession when he saw both of them. Recognition, surprise, and then the particular alertness of a man who understands that an unscheduled visit from 2 people who left separately and returned together means something has happened. "Come inside," he said, before either of them spoke. Eleanor laid Cole's note on Tom's kitchen table. She let him read it. She watched his face do what Caleb's face never quite did show, everything, the anger moving through it openly, the tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw set when he got to the last line. He put the note down carefully. "The ranch is a long way from anywhere," he said, repeating Cole's words back in a tone that made them sound like what they were, a threat delivered by a man who was used to threats being enough. "He can't use legal channels anymore," Caleb said. "The filing's amended. The documentation's public. If he moves against the ranch or against Eleanor directly, he's doing it without cover." "Which makes him more dangerous," Tom said, "not less." He looked at Eleanor. "A man like Cole doesn't recalibrate. He escalates." "I know," Eleanor said. Tom was quiet for a moment. He got up and poured coffee for all of them, moving around his kitchen with the efficiency of a man comfortable in his own space, and he didn't say anything until all 3 cups were on the table. "He's got 2 ranch hands he uses for the other kind of work," Tom said, sitting back down. "Not cattle work. I've seen them in town. Big men. Do what they're told and don't ask the kind of questions that would make a reasonable person uncomfortable." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "If Cole's going to make a move on the ranch, it'll be those 2. "When?" Caleb asked. "He knows you went to the commissioner's office yesterday. He knows the filing got amended." Tom shook his head. "He won't wait long. A man like that every day, he doesn't act as a day that feels like losing ground." Eleanor looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at her. "We need to get back today," she said. "We need to get back now," Caleb said. He was already standing. Tom pushed back his chair. "I'm coming with you." Caleb started to say something. Eleanor could see it forming the instinct to say that Tom didn't need to involve himself to keep the problem contained to the people it was most directly about. She saw it form and saw Tom see it forming. "Don't," Tom said flatly. "I watched that ranch for 4 months. I know every inch of that fence line and every gap in it. And if Cole sends men in the dark—" He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. "You need someone who knows the ground." Caleb closed his mouth, opened it again. "We ride in an hour," he said. "I need to check my horse." Tom was already pulling on his coat. "Your horse is fine. Mine needs 10 minutes. Eleanor picked up Cole's note from the table, folded it back into her pocket, and drank the rest of her coffee, standing up. They made it back to the ranch by late afternoon, pushing the horses harder than Eleanor would have chosen under ordinary circumstances. The ranch looked exactly as they'd left it, quiet, solid, the kind of ordinary that only reads as relief when you've spent the last 3 days worrying about it. Eleanor went straight to the kitchen garden. The seedlings were fine. All 5 of them slightly more grown than when she'd left. The way living things tend to quietly improve when you're not watching. She crouched in the dirt beside them and pressed her fingers into the soil near the root stamp, which meant the weather had cooperated, and felt something unknot in her chest. Caleb appeared at the garden gate. "They're all right," she said before he could ask. "Good," he said. He didn't make it into more than it was. She appreciated that. They ate supper quickly. Eleanor cooked. Tom helped. Caleb went to check the perimeter fence. When he came back, he had the specific expression of a man who had found something he expected to find and didn't like. "East fence," he said, sitting down. "Section near the creek. Someone's been along it recently. Tracks. 2 horses, not ours." Tom and Eleanor looked at him. "They're scouting," Tom said. "That's what I think," Caleb said. Eleanor put down her fork. "How recent?" "Yesterday, maybe the day before, while we were in Dust Creek." The table went quiet with the specific quality of 3 people adjusting to a new reality at the same time. "So he sent men while we were gone," Eleanor said. "While we were in the commissioner's office proving he'd falsified numbers," Caleb said. "His people were out here learning the property." He looked at Tom. "You were right. He doesn't recalibrate." "What's the weakest point?" Eleanor asked Tom. "On the fence line. Where would you come through if you were trying to get to the house without being seen?" Tom didn't hesitate. "The northwest corner, where the fence dips into the tree line. You can't see it from the house or from the barn, and the ground's soft enough that you don't hear horses until they're close." Eleanor picked her fork back up. "Then that's where we watch tonight." Caleb looked at her. "We." "Yes," she said. "We." She met his eyes without apology. "I'm not sitting inside that house waiting to find out what happens. If someone's coming onto this land, I want to know the moment they set foot on it." A pause. "You know how to handle a rifle?" Tom asked. "My mother taught me," Eleanor said. "She had opinions about women being capable of defending themselves." "She and my grandmother would have gotten along," Tom said. He stabbed a piece of salt pork. "I'll take the northwest corner. Caleb takes the barn. Miss Whitfield takes the house," Caleb said. It wasn't a command. His voice didn't have the quality of command, but it was firm. "The house needs someone inside in case they split up and one comes to the door." Eleanor opened her mouth. "I'm not keeping you safe," Caleb said before she could argue. "I'm covering a position. The house is a position. It needs covering the same as everything else." She looked at him. He looked back, level and honest. "All right," she said. "The house." The night was long. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across her knees and the lamp turned low and the windows dark so that she could see out without being seen from the outside. She had done this before, sat in the dark, waiting for something, but before it had always been in the trading post, waiting for her father to come home, waiting for the sound of his boots on the porch to tell her whether tonight was going to be bad or worse. This waiting was different. This was waiting she had chosen in a place that was hers for reasons she understood and had decided were worth the cost. It was, she thought, an entirely different way to sit in the dark. An hour passed. 2. Sometime after midnight, she heard it, the specific quietness, that isn't silence. The kind that happens when something living is trying very hard not to make noise. She went still, set down the coffee cup she'd been holding, moved her hands to the rifle. The sound came from the northwest, exactly where Tom had said. She didn't move to the window. She stayed at the table listening, counting footsteps that she couldn't quite hear, but could feel through the specific quality of the air. The way you can sometimes feel the presence of a thing before you have proof of it. Then a voice low outside, maybe 20 feet from the back of the house. "The barn first. Check if Walker's in there." Eleanor stood up. She moved to the back door, not the window, keeping herself against the wall the way her mother had taught her. Don't silhouette yourself against light. Don't give a position away. Know where you're standing before you make any sound. She pressed her back to the wall beside the door and breathed. Outside movement. 2 of them, she was almost certain. Moving toward the barn. Then from the barn, Caleb's voice calm as a man commenting on the weather. "Evening," he said. "You boys need something." A silence that Eleanor felt in her whole body. Then, scuffling, brief, decisive, and a sound she recognized as a man hitting the ground hard, and then Tom's voice from somewhere in the tree line. Don't even consider it." Eleanor came through the back door. The 2 men were on the ground near the barn entrance. One of them disarmed both of them with the particular stillness of people who have just discovered that what they walked into was not what they were expecting. Caleb stood over them. Tom came out of the tree line with his rifle level. Caleb looked up when Eleanor appeared. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," she said. "You? Fine." He looked at the 2 men on the ground. "These are Cole's hands, the ones you mentioned, Tom." "That's right," Tom said, not lowering the rifle. "Evening, Hector. Didn't expect to see you out this way." The man called Hector, broad, steady-faced, with the look of someone who had made a professional misjudgment, said nothing. "Here's what happens now," Caleb said to both of them pleasantly. "You're going to tell me what Cole sent you to do. And then you're going to ride back to Cole's ranch and tell him it didn't happen. And then if you have any intelligence at all, which I am choosing to assume for your benefit, you are going to decide whether working for a man who sent you to trespass on private property in the middle of the night is actually worth what he's paying you." Hector looked at him. "He sent us to spook the livestock," he said finally. "Run the fence, make it look like weather damage." "Not to hurt anyone," the other one said quickly. Too quickly. Like a man establishing something important for the record. "Not tonight," Caleb said. "Tonight was the first step." Nobody disagreed with this assessment. Eleanor looked at these 2 men lying on the ground outside the barn on Caleb Walker's ranch and felt the strangeness of the moment. The fact that she had been the object of this, that a man's wounded pride had traveled 3 weeks and a legal filing, and now arrived here in the dark, in the form of 2 hired hands with orders to make things look like weather. "Get up," she said. They looked at her. "Get up," she said again. "And look at me." They got up. They looked at her, a woman in the dark in work boots, holding a rifle standing in front of a house that had been 6 weeks ago. No part of her life, and was now the thing she would stand in the dark to defend. "Tell Harrison Cole," she said, "that the fence is standing, the livestock are fine, and the woman he tried to purchase is still here." She let that sit for a moment. "And she has a very good memory for names, and she knows a territorial judge in Cheyenne, and she kept her mother's ledgers." She held their eyes. "Tell him all of that." They told her they would. Caleb sent them off the property on their horses and watched them go, and Tom lowered his rifle, and the 3 of them stood in the dark outside the barn, in the particular silence that follows tension when it releases. "Well," Tom said after a moment. "Well," Caleb agreed. Eleanor let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like 3 weeks. "Coffee," she said. They sat around the kitchen table until nearly 3 in the morning, drinking coffee and talking through what needed to happen next. The attempted fence damage would need to be documented. The tracks near the northwest corner needed to be preserved before weather took them. And the men's admission witnessed by all 3 of them needed to be put in writing while the details were fresh. Eleanor wrote it out. 2 pages precise and dated, covering what had been said and by whom and when. Tom and Caleb signed it. Eleanor signed it. "This goes to the territorial judge in Cheyenne," she said, along with Cole's note and the amended filing. "You actually know a territorial judge?" Tom asked. "I know of one," Eleanor said. "My mother had a cousin who married into Cheyenne society. Whether that's enough to get a letter read is another matter." She folded the document. "But it's more than Cole thinks I have. And right now, making him uncertain about what I have is as important as what I actually have." Tom looked at her with the expression she'd first seen at supper weeks ago. The frank, uncomplicated respect of someone who has reassessed their initial understanding of a situation. "Your mother," he said, "raised something exceptional." Eleanor set down her pen. She had not cried since the porch. Not once through any of it. Not when her father counted the money. Not in the east-facing room, when she'd first sat on the bed and let herself breathe. Not when she'd opened her mother's ledgers in the trading post and felt the handwriting hit her like a physical thing. She had kept it packed down and manageable because there had always been something that needed doing. Tom's words hit the packed-down place directly, and she felt it give just slightly. "Thank you," she said. She meant it in a much larger sense than the words could hold. Tom seemed to understand this. He picked up his coffee cup. "More," he said. "Please," she said. He refilled her cup. She was grateful for the ordinary mercy of that. In the morning, Caleb rode out early to document the fence tracks, and Tom went with him, and Eleanor started bread because the house needed it, and because bread was the kind of work that kept her hands busy while her mind did its necessary processing. She was on her second kneading when she heard the horse. One horse. Coming up the main trail, not cutting across the pasture the way Cole's men had come. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the rifle from the table and went to the window. The rider was alone. She didn't recognize him immediately, and then she did, and her hands tightened on the rifle before she consciously decided to tighten them, because the man riding up the trail toward Caleb Walker's ranch was her father. Walter Whitfield had not been on a horse in years, from the look of it. He rode badly with the posture of a man whose body had forgotten the mechanics and was relearning them under protest. He stopped in the yard and looked at the house and did not call out. Eleanor set the rifle against the wall. She went outside. Her father looked older than he had 3 days ago in the trading post. Or maybe she was seeing him differently, not through the lens of daughter, not through the practiced distance of someone who had spent 20 years managing the consequences of his choices, but through the clearer eyes of a woman who had just spent a night holding a rifle in the dark to defend what was hers. "Eleanor," he said, same careful voice. "Papa." She crossed her arms. "What are you doing here?" He looked down at the saddle horn. "Cole came to the trading post last night, after you left. He was—" Walter stopped. "He wasn't pleasant. He rarely is. He said things." Walter looked up. "About what he plans to do, to you, to this place." Eleanor waited. "He said the legal business was a setback, not an ending. He said—" Her father's voice had something in it. She hadn't heard from him in a long time. Something that might have been shame. Something that might have been something adjacent to actual fear. He said a woman who makes enemies of the wrong people doesn't tend to stay comfortable for long. "He said that to you," Eleanor said. "He said it to me, in my store, in front of 2 of his men." Walter met her eyes. "He wanted me to pass it along." Eleanor looked at her father for a long moment. At this man who had stood on a porch and announced her worthlessness and chosen a money pouch over every other consideration. Who had 3 days ago told Cole's man he didn't know where she'd gone and handed her 3 ledgers that dismantled Cole's case. Who had ridden badly and uncomfortably 14 miles to tell her something she needed to know. "What exactly did he say?" she asked. "Exactly." Walter told her. Every word. She listened without interrupting, filing each piece the specific phrasing. Cole had used the names of the men who'd been there, the exact threat, and the exact audience. When he finished, she said, "That's witness testimony." Walter blinked. "What? You were there. You heard him say it. To your face in your store in front of witnesses." She uncrossed her arms. That's a direct threat made publicly against a person who has already filed documentation with the Territorial Commissioner's office. She looked at her father. Will you put it in writing? Walter stared at her. Will you sign your name to what you just told me? She said. Date and place and exactly what he said. Her father was quiet for a long time. She watched him work through it. The calculation she'd watched him do her whole life, the cost-benefit arithmetic of every decision. She watched him weigh it. He'll come after the trading post, Walter said, if I testify against him. He's already coming after everything, Eleanor said. The question is whether you want to be on the side that wins. Another silence. That's your mother talking, Walter said, and his voice had something cracked in it. Yes, Eleanor said. It is. Walter Whitfield got down from his horse. He did it slowly with the stiffness of a man who had ridden 14 miles in a body that hadn't done it in years. He stood in the yard in front of his daughter and looked at her with an expression she didn't know how to name, too complicated, too layered, too late in coming to be simply regret. I'll sign it, he said. Eleanor nodded. She didn't say thank you. It didn't feel like the right response to a man doing finally, and at considerable cost, the basic thing he should have always done. She just nodded and said, Come inside. There's bread almost ready. He followed her in. Caleb and Tom came back from the fence line an hour later and found Walter Whitfield at the kitchen table signing a witnessed statement, while Eleanor sat across from him with a pen, the 3 ledgers, and the particular focused expression she wore when she was doing something that mattered. Caleb stopped in the doorway. He looked at Walter, looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked up at him briefly, just briefly, and something passed between them that wasn't a full communication, but was enough. He came in. He sat down. He did not ask questions. Tom, who had the social intelligence of a man who had survived 50 years, by knowing when to be quiet, poured himself coffee and leaned against the wall and did not say a word. Walter finished signing. Eleanor witnessed it, and Tom witnessed it, and Caleb witnessed it. 4 signatures on a document that now contained a direct threat made by Harrison Cole in front of witnesses against Eleanor Whitfield and the property of Caleb Walker, made after a legal filing based on falsified numbers, had been formally amended. Eleanor stacked it with the other documents. The withdrawal. The signed admission from Cole's 2 ranch hands. The ledgers. Her father's witness statement. She looked at the stack. I want to take this to Cheyenne, she said. To the territorial court. Not the commissioner's office, the court directly. That's a 3-day ride, Caleb said. I know. And we don't know for certain that Cole won't. Tom can stay, Tom said from the wall. I'll watch the property. Everyone looked at him. I know the fence line, he said. I know the animals, and... He looked at Eleanor's father with the particular candor of a man who has made a decision about a person. If Mr. Whitfield is willing to stay as well, we've got 2 sets of eyes. He looked at Walter. Are you willing? Walter looked at his daughter, then at the stack of documents, then at Tom. I'm willing, he said. Eleanor looked at her father sitting in Caleb Walker's kitchen, in the house she had helped fix and clean and stock and make into something that felt like a home. She looked at him there and thought about all the ways a person could arrive somewhere too late, and whether too late was always the same as not at all. She thought it probably wasn't. She wasn't ready to say it out loud, but she thought it. Caleb, she said, turning to him, can we be ready to leave by tomorrow morning? I was already calculating she could see it, the internal logistics moving behind his eyes. If we pack tonight, he said. Then we pack tonight, she said. She stood up and picked up the stack of documents and went to find the good leather satchel she'd seen on the shelf in the back room. The one with the brass buckle that had belonged to someone important enough to own nice things, and she packed every page carefully. The ledgers last because they were the heaviest and the most irreplaceable, and she buckled the satchel shut and set it by the door. Then she went back to the kitchen and cut the bread. It had come out right dense and good, the kind that holds together under pressure and doesn't fall apart when you put a knife to it. She set it on the table, and they ate all 4 of them in the kitchen of a ranch that 3 months ago had been empty around a table that had been eaten at by one person who had built something in the mountains alone for 4 years, and the food was ordinary, and the company was complicated and necessary and real. Outside, the evening was coming in from the west, and the fence line was intact, and the tomato seedlings in the kitchen garden had put out 2 more leaves since Eleanor had checked them that morning. And Harrison Cole, with all his money, and his ice-colored eyes, and his absolute certainty that isolation had consequences, did not know what was coming for him. He had threatened the wrong woman, and she had the paperwork to prove it. They left at dawn, the satchel strapped to Eleanor's horse, because she had decided without discussion that she would carry it herself. Caleb didn't argue. He had learned over the past weeks to recognize the difference between Eleanor being stubborn and Eleanor asserting something fundamental about herself, and this was the second kind. Walter stood in the yard to watch them go. He looked like a man who had slept badly on a borrowed blanket and was not complaining about it, which was, Eleanor had decided sometime around 3 in the morning, its own form of progress. Tom stood beside him with his coffee cup and raised it as they rode out. 3 days, Tom called after them. 3 days, Caleb called back. Eleanor did not call back anything. She was already thinking about Cheyenne. The ride was different from the one they'd made to Dust Creek. That one had been reactive, a response to Cole's letter, driven by the need to get somewhere before something got worse. This one was deliberate. They were moving towards something rather than away from it, and Eleanor felt the difference in her posture, in the way she sat the saddle, and the quality of her attention on the road ahead. She had spent the previous night reading through the documents one final time, making sure the chronology was clean, making sure anyone who picked up that satchel could follow the thread from beginning to end without her there to explain it. Her mother had taught her that. If the record doesn't speak for itself, she used to say, you'll spend the rest of your life speaking for the record. Make it clear enough that it doesn't need you. The ledgers were clear. The amended filing was clear. The witness statement from Walter Whitfield was clear. The signed admission from Cole's 2 ranch hands was clear. Cole's own note, his handwriting, his signature, his words was clear. She had a good case. She knew she had a good case. She also knew that having a good case and winning were not the same thing in a territory where Harrison Cole had spent 20 years buying influence the same way he bought everything else. Tell me about the judge, she said somewhere past midday of the first day. Caleb had been riding slightly ahead. He eased back to match her pace. Judge Harlan Voss. He's been on the territorial bench 8 years. Before that, he was a circuit judge out of Missouri. A pause. He's not Cole's man. You know this, how? Tom told me. Tom knows everyone. He glanced at her. Voss had a case 2 years ago, a land grab some outfit out of Denver, trying to push out homesteaders on the eastern range. He ruled against the money. Cost him some social standing with the cattle barons. A judge who rules against the money, Eleanor said. That's either very reassuring or means he's already been replaced. Tom says he's still there. Tom says a lot of things. Tom is usually right. She shifted the satchel on her saddle. But usually isn't always. No, Caleb agreed. It isn't. They rode with that thought between them for a while. What happens if Voss won't see us? Eleanor said. Then we find someone who will. And if Cole's influence runs deeper than we think. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then we document that too, he said. And we keep going up until we find a level where it doesn't reach. He looked at her directly. Eleanor. Cole falsified numbers in a legal filing. He sent men to trespass and tamper with private property. He made direct threats witnessed by 3 people, including your father. He paused. That's not a weak case. That's a strong case. We work the strong case. She held his gaze. You're not uncertain, she said, about any of this. I'm uncertain about plenty of things, he said. I'm not uncertain about you. The road went quiet between them, not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, but the kind that settles after something true has been said, and both people need a moment to let it exist without immediately burying it under more words. Eleanor looked at the road ahead. Caleb, she said. When this is done, she stopped, started again. When this is resolved, whatever way it resolves. Another stop. She pressed her palm briefly against the satchel, feeling the leather and the weight of everything inside it. I want to stay. On the ranch. Not because I don't have somewhere else to go, because I want to be there. Silence. I know that's different from what I said in Clara's pie shop, she said. It is, Caleb said. I meant what I said then too, Eleanor said carefully. I wasn't ready then. I needed... She searched for the honest word. I needed to do this first. This part. The part where I handle something myself and know I handled it. And now? And now I know. She looked at him. I'm still learning what wanting things feels like. But I know what this is. Caleb was quiet for long enough that Eleanor felt the beginning of the specific discomfort that comes when you've said something honest and aren't sure how it's going to land. Then he said, I'm glad. Just that. 2 words said the way he said things, without decoration, without performance, with the weight of a man who meant exactly what he said, and nothing more and nothing less. Eleanor exhaled. All right, she said. Good. Good, he agreed. They rode on toward Cheyenne, and the mountains watched them go, and somewhere behind them on a ranch in the northern valley. 5 tomato seedlings stood in their row in the kitchen garden, growing in the direction of the light. Cheyenne hit them on the afternoon of the 3rd day, like a wall of noise and humanity. Eleanor had been to Cheyenne twice in her life, once as a child with her mother, once at 16 on a supply run. Both times she had found it overwhelming. Both times she had managed it by focusing on the specific thing she had come to do and not looking at anything else. She used the same strategy now. They found a boarding house on a quiet street. They ate, they slept, and in the morning, Eleanor was up before the sun again, dressed in the most presentable thing she owned, the satchel across her shoulder, walking toward the territorial courthouse with Caleb beside her. The courthouse was a solid building that communicated through its architecture that the territory took itself seriously. Eleanor appreciated that. She walked in through the front door without hesitating and found the clerk's office. The clerk was a young man who looked at Eleanor with the particular blankness of someone who had processed a great many people and had long since stopped seeing them individually. He had a stack of papers in front of him and the pen-stained fingers of someone who spent his entire professional life writing other people's business down. I need to file documents with Judge Voss's office, Eleanor said. And I need to request a hearing. The clerk looked up. Nature of the matter: falsification of a legal filing, harassment, trespass, and direct threats against a private citizen. She set the satchel on his counter. I have documentation for all of it. The clerk looked at the satchel, looked at her. Judge Voss's docket is... I understand his docket is full, Eleanor said. I'm asking you to put these documents in front of him and let him decide whether the matter warrants his time. She held the clerk's eyes. The documentation includes a legal filing amended by your own commissioner's office less than a week ago, a note signed by the man making the threats, and witness testimony from 3 adults, including a statement from a resident of Dust Creek who heard the threats made directly. She paused. I believe Judge Voss will find it sufficient. The clerk was looking at her differently now. Not with warmth exactly, but with the specific alertness of someone who has recalibrated. Your name, he said. Eleanor Whitfield, she said. Of Dust Creek and the Northern Valley. He wrote it down. Mr. Walker, she added, nodding at Caleb beside her. He's a property owner and witness. Caleb nodded at the clerk. The clerk wrote that down too. I'll convey the request, he said. You'll need to wait. We'll wait, Eleanor said. They waited 4 hours. Eleanor spent most of it sitting in the hallway outside the clerk's office, the satchel across her knees, going through the documents one more time in her head, not reading them, just tracing the logic of them, the sequence of events and evidence that she had been building since the morning she'd walked into the trading post and asked her father for the ledgers. Caleb sat beside her and did not fidget. She had noticed this about him early on. His capacity for stillness was genuine, not performed. He didn't drum his fingers, or shift his weight, or fill the silence with unnecessary words. He just sat present and steady, and it was the most useful thing anyone could have done. At the end of the 2nd hour, he said quietly, You're going through it again in your head. Yes, she said. Is it still holding together? Yes. Then stop, he said. It'll hold. You built it right. She looked at him. "How do you know I built it right?" she said. "You haven't read most of it." "I've watched you work," he said simply. "You don't do things halfway." She held that for a moment. Then she put her hands flat on the satchel and stopped going through the documents in her head. They waited the rest of the 4 hours in silence, and it was the most companionable silence Eleanor had ever been in. The clerk came back at the end of the 4th hour and said Judge Voss would see them. Harlan Voss was 60 years old, broad-shouldered, in a way that suggested he had been physical in his youth, and hadn't entirely lost it, with white hair and dark eyes, and the particular expression of a man who had sat behind a bench for 8 years and was no longer capable of being surprised by the range of human behavior, but had not yet become indifferent to it. He read through the documents without speaking. All of them in order, taking his time with the ledgers and the amended filing, and Cole's note, and the ranch hand's admission, and Walter Whitfield's witness statement. Eleanor sat across from him and did not speak either. Caleb sat beside her and did not speak either. When Voss finished, he set the last page down and looked at Eleanor over the top of it. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "how long did it take you to put this together?" "About 3 weeks," she said. "The documentation. The process of building it started August 14th. That was the date of the date my father offered my marriage contract to the public," Eleanor said. "Yes." Voss was quiet for a moment. "The ledgers," he said. "Your mother kept these from 1871 until her death in 1879. I helped her keep them from the time I was 14. And the discrepancy between the ledger figures and the figures in Cole's filing is $65, Eleanor said. The ledgers show a remaining debt of $47. Cole's filing submitted a figure of $112. Mr. Walker paid $63. The debt was therefore overpaid by $16. Voss looked at the ledgers again, then at Cole's filing, then at the amended filing from Commissioner Pate's office. Commissioner Pate amended the filing, he said. When presented with the ledger documentation, yes, without requiring further verification. The entries are dated and signed in my mother's hand. Commissioner Pate found them sufficient. Voss looked at the ranch hand's statement. And this admission of trespass and intent to damage property. Made verbally in the presence of 3 witnesses the night of. Eleanor gave him the date and names. I transcribed it the same night. All 3 witnesses signed. Voss set the papers down. He looked at Eleanor the way very few people in authority had ever looked at her, as if she were someone whose competence he was genuinely registering. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I've been on this bench 8 years. I have read a great many filings." He paused. "This is one of the better documented complaints I've received." Something released in Eleanor's chest quietly, without drama. She kept her face steady. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." Voss picked up Cole's note, the 4 lines in precise handwriting, with the signature at the bottom. "This is Cole's direct hand." "His signature," Eleanor said. "A boy delivered it to Mr. Walker outside Clara Howell's pie shop in Dust Creek." "Clara Howell," Voss said, a slight shift in his expression recognition. "She's a credible local figure." "She can verify the circumstances of delivery if needed," Eleanor said. "She was present." Voss looked at Caleb. "Mr. Walker, you received this note directly." "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "Delivered by a boy of approximately 12 years, who stated he'd been paid by a big man with gray eyes." He paused. "Harrison Cole has gray eyes." "I'm aware," Voss said dryly. "I've met Harrison Cole." The room went very still. "Has he appeared before your court?" Eleanor asked carefully. "Not formally." Voss's expression had the precise neutrality of a man choosing his words in front of a record. "He has made his opinions known through the appropriate social channels over the years." A pause. "His opinions have not always aligned with the law." Eleanor felt Caleb shift slightly beside her, just slightly, the way he shifted when something confirmed what he'd suspected. "Judge Voss," she said, "I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking for the law to be applied to a documented situation, equally the same way it would be applied if the person filing this complaint were a man with property and a standing." She held his eyes. "I have the documentation. I have the witnesses. I have Cole's own note and his own hired men's admission." She paused. "I'm asking for a formal inquiry into the falsified filing and a restraining order against further interference with Mr. Walker's property and my person." Voss looked at her for a long moment. "You'll have it," he said. They were back in the hallway 20 minutes later, with a clerk's receipt and a formal case number, and the understanding that official correspondence would be sent to Harrison Cole within the week. Eleanor held the receipt and looked at the case number. Just a number, just ink on paper. But it meant that what had happened to her was now a matter of official record in a court that had jurisdiction over the man who had done it. She looked at Caleb, who was watching her with the expression she had finally over the past weeks learned to read fully. It was not pride. He wasn't the kind of man who felt pride in another person's accomplishments as if they reflected on him. It was something cleaner and more direct than that. It was the expression of a person who had watched someone do something real and was simply glad to have been there for it. "It's not finished," she said. "He'll fight it." "He will," Caleb agreed. "It could take months. Legal process is slow." "It is. And even with the restraining order, we'll need to be careful about the ranch. He could still—" "Eleanor." Caleb said her name the same way he'd said it in Clara's pie shop, with enough weight that it stopped her. "We'll be careful. We'll stay alert. Tom's there, your father's there. We have a case number and a judge who isn't Cole's man." He looked at her steadily. "You did everything you could do today. That's enough for today." She looked at the case number on the receipt. "It's enough for today," she said. He held out his hand. Not romantically, not as a gesture toward something she wasn't ready for. He held it out the way one person holds a hand out to another when they have been through something together, and the something is over, and they are both still standing. Simple. Honest. Just his hand in the space between them. She took it. They stood there in the hallway of the Cheyenne Territorial Courthouse, Eleanor Whitfield and Caleb Walker, holding on to what they had built together out of necessity and choice, and the slow accumulation of trust, and the world continued its ordinary business around them, entirely unaware. The ride back took 3 days. On the second evening, they stopped at the same creek bed where they had camped on the way down, and Eleanor built the fire because she had learned how in the past weeks, and she was better at it than she had been the first time she'd tried. Caleb cooked. They ate without ceremony and sat with the fire between them and the dark around them. "Can I tell you something?" Eleanor said. "Yes," he said. "The night my father offered to sell me. On the porch." She looked at the fire. "I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just stood there." A pause. "I've been thinking about that ever since. Why I didn't fight. What it means that I didn't." Caleb was quiet, listening. "I think—" She pressed her palms together. "I think I had been trained my whole life to understand that fighting was not something I was allowed to do. That my job was to be useful and quiet, and not cause trouble." She looked up at the stars for a moment. "And then you walked through that crowd, and you fought for me, and something woke up." She looked at him across the fire. "Not because you saved me, but because watching someone believe I was worth fighting for made me remember that I was." The fire ticked. A branch settled. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called and fell silent again. "I should have done it myself," she said. "Earlier. Years earlier." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Or maybe you needed something to change first. Something outside yourself to make the inside thing possible." He met her eyes. "That's not weakness. That's just how it sometimes happens." Eleanor held his gaze. "Your mother would have liked you too," she said. Something moved in his face, that brief real thing that happened when something landed somewhere it wasn't defended against. He looked at the fire. "I hope so," he said. They sat with that for a while. The fire burned down slowly. The night was large and quiet around them, the way nights in open country are indifferent and enormous, and somehow comforting in their indifference. "Caleb," Eleanor said. Ask me something." He looked up. "What?" "Ask me something. The way I asked you that first morning when we were riding to the ranch. I asked you questions. You answered them. She held his gaze. I'd like to do that for you. I haven't asked enough. He was quiet for a moment. You've been paying attention, he said. I always have been, she said. Ask. He thought about it. The fire was low now, mostly coals glowing orange and steady. Do you know what you want? He said. Not from this, from coal, from the court. That's handled. I mean, he paused. From your life. From what comes next. Eleanor considered this the way she considered things that mattered seriously without rushing. Yes, she said. Tell me. I want the ranch, she said. The work, the fence that needs better posts, and the smokehouse and the root cellar stocked properly before winter. She paused. I want the tomato seedlings to survive to spring, and I want to plant more of them from the seeds my mother kept until there are too many for just 2 people to eat, and we have to give them to Tom and Clara and anyone else who wants them. Another pause. I want to write letters to the judge in Cheyenne until Harrison Cole is properly accountable. I want to keep ledgers the way my mother kept them. She looked at him directly. I want to wake up in the east-facing room and know that I am there because I chose to be. She held his gaze. And I want whatever this is between us, whatever it's going to be. I want that too, when I'm ready, when it's honest. Caleb looked at her across the cooling fire for a long moment. That's a good answer, he said. It's an honest one, she said. Same thing, he said, for what it's worth. Eleanor smiled. It happened before she could manage it, just came up out of her real and unguarded the way smiles do when you're not thinking about them. She felt it on her face and didn't try to take it back. Get some sleep, Caleb said. We've got a long ride tomorrow. I know, she said. She lay down on her bedroll and looked at the stars for a while before she closed her eyes, and the last thing she thought before she slept was that the sky over this country was a different size than the sky over Dust Creek. Wider. More room in it. She slept well. They came back to the ranch on the afternoon of the 3rd day, and Tom Briggs was on the porch with his coffee cup and an expression of controlled relief that he was doing his best to make look casual. About time, he said. Any trouble? Caleb asked. Quiet as a church, Tom said. Your father. He looked at Eleanor. He fixed the east fence posts, all of them. Took him 2 days. Didn't ask for help and didn't complain. A pause. Man's more capable than he looks when he decides to be. Eleanor stepped up onto the porch. Walter Whitfield appeared in the doorway behind Tom. He looked like a man who had spent 2 days doing physical work he wasn't used to, which meant he was stiff and tired and probably sore in places he'd forgotten he had. He also looked, Eleanor thought, slightly more like a person than he had looked in a long time. Not better exactly, just more present. Like something that had been at a slight remove from itself had moved an inch closer. The fence is done, he said. Tom told me, Eleanor said. Thank you. He nodded. He didn't try to make it more than it was, which she appreciated. She went past him into the house and put the satchel down on the kitchen table and stood in the kitchen of this house that had been empty 4 months ago and was now full of the accumulated evidence of people choosing to be somewhere. She went to the back window and looked at the kitchen garden. The tomato seedlings had put out more leaves while she was gone. All 5 of them growing steadily in the direction of whatever light they could find. She put her hand flat on the glass for a moment. Then she turned around and went to put coffee on, because there were 4 people in and around this house who had earned a cup and she had the means to make one. The official correspondence arrived at the ranch 11 days later. Eleanor was in the garden when Tom brought it from the Valley Post, a sealed letter bearing the mark of the Cheyenne Territorial Court. She took it with both hands and stood in the kitchen garden and opened it. Harrison Cole had been formally notified of the inquiry. A date had been set for a preliminary hearing. The restraining order was in effect prohibiting Cole or his agents from contact with Eleanor Whitfield or interference with the property of Caleb Walker, pending the outcome of the proceeding. At the bottom of the letter, in the judge's own hand, rather than a clerk's, the documentation submitted was thorough and credible. The matter will be taken seriously. Eleanor read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket and went back to weeding the garden because the tomato plants needed it, and they didn't stop needing it because legal correspondence had arrived. She was still working when Caleb came to the garden gate. "The letter came," she said without looking up. "Tom told me." He waited. Restraining order in effect. Hearing date set. Cole's been notified. She sat back on her heels and looked at the 5 seedlings in their row. Judge Voss wrote a note at the bottom in his own hand. Said the documentation was thorough and credible, and the matter would be taken seriously. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Your mother's ledgers," he said. "My mother's ledgers," Eleanor agreed. 12 years of precise record-keeping by a woman who everyone underestimated. She looked up at him. She knew. She always knew that documentation was the thing that would outlast everything else. That paper remembers what people prefer to forget. She was right, Caleb said. She was right about most things. Eleanor pulled one more weed, set it aside, sat back again. "The hearing is in 6 weeks. We'll need to ride back to Cheyenne." "I know. And we'll need Walter to come. His testimony is part of the formal record now." "I know." He paused. "Have you talked to him about it?" "Not yet." She looked at the garden gate. "I will tonight." She got to her feet and brushed the dirt from her hands and looked at the 5 tomato plants one more time. They were sturdy now, not fragile things clinging to survival, but actual plants putting out real growth, as committed to being there as anything else in that garden. "They're going to make it," she said. Caleb looked at them. "Yes," he said. "They are." She came through the gate, and he held it for her, and she walked past him toward the house, and he fell into step beside her, the way he always did. Not ahead, not behind, just beside. The way 2 people walk when they have decided without making a formal announcement of it, that beside is where they belong. The hearing in Cheyenne lasted 2 days. Eleanor testified. Caleb testified. Walter Whitfield sat in the witness chair and told the court in his careful and calibrated way exactly what Harrison Cole had said to him in the trading post on that September night. And he said it clearly and without wavering, and Eleanor watched him do it from across the room and felt something in her chest that was not forgiveness exactly, but was something in that direction. The acknowledgement that a person can do a terrible thing and still eventually do a necessary thing, and that both of those things are true simultaneously. Cole's lawyer was competent. He challenged the ledgers, challenged the timeline, challenged the chain of custody of the documents. Judge Voss sustained some objections and overruled others. The process was slow and methodical and entirely without drama. At the end of the second day, Voss issued his findings. The filing had been falsified. The figures submitted by Cole's representatives did not match the documented record. The trespass and property interference were substantiated by physical evidence and witness testimony. The threatening note written in Cole's hand and bearing his signature constituted direct evidence of intimidation. Harrison Cole was fined. The fine was substantial, not ruinous for a man of his means, but significant. More significantly, the findings were entered into the public record, which meant that every future legal dealing Cole engaged in would carry this history alongside it. He was not imprisoned. Eleanor had not expected imprisonment. She had expected accountability, and accountability was what she got. Cole sat across the courtroom through the reading of the findings, with the expression of a man who was already calculating his next move, his ice-colored eyes steady and uninformative. He looked at Eleanor once. She held his gaze without blinking until he looked away first. That was the end of it. Not a dramatic ending, not a moment where everything was suddenly resolved into pure safety and security, but an ending that was real, documented, official, and true. They stopped at Clara Howell's pie shop on the way out of Cheyenne. Clara had coffee waiting as if she'd known they were coming, which was probably just what Clara did as a general practice. She set 4 cups on the table, Eleanor, Caleb, Walter, Tom, who had ridden down for the hearing because he had decided without being asked that this was the kind of thing you showed up for. "Well," Clara said. "Cole's been formally found in violation," Eleanor said. "Fined, public record." Clara set the coffee pot down. She looked at Eleanor with the particular assessment that Eleanor had noticed on their first meeting. Clear-eyed and direct, the look of a woman who had long since stopped softening her observations to make them easier to receive. "Good," Clara said. That was all. But when she brought the pie apple again, same crust, she set Eleanor's piece down and let her hand rest briefly on Eleanor's shoulder. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Eleanor put her hand over Clara's and pressed it once. They ate. Tom told a story about something that had happened to the east fence again while they were gone that turned out to be a false alarm caused by a curious elk. And the table laughed, and Walter Whitfield laughed too carefully and somewhat rustily, like a man rediscovering a function he hadn't used in years. Eleanor watched her father laugh at Tom Briggs's elk story in Clara Howell's pie shop in Cheyenne and thought about all the ways a story can end that aren't the ways you thought it would end when you were in the middle of it. She thought about August 14th. The porch. The crowd. The heat. The money pouch. She thought about 5 tomato seedlings wrapped in damp cloth. She thought about an east-facing window and a written agreement and $20 a month and a fence line that needed better posts and a man who stood beside her and not in front of her and called it obvious. She thought about her mother's handwriting, small and precise and absolutely legible. Recording 12 years of transactions in a wooden chest under a window in a trading post in Dust Creek. She thought she built something that outlasted her. That protected me when she was gone. That won. And Eleanor Whitfield, who had stood on a porch in August heat and been offered to the highest bidder and had not screamed, had not fought, had simply held the railing and refused to let them see her break, had carried those ledgers across 200 miles and laid them on a judge's desk and let them speak. They had spoken. The ranch in the Northern Valley came into view on a late October afternoon, the air sharp and clean with the first cold edge of the season turning in it. Eleanor rode into the yard and swung down from her horse and went directly to the kitchen garden. The tomato plants were still standing. The season had turned, and they had started to go dormant the way plants do. Pulling inward, slowing down, preparing for the cold, with the practical patience of living things that understand that survival sometimes means going quiet for a while. She crouched down and touched the nearest stem. Sturdy, real, rooted. Behind her she heard Caleb's boots on the yard. "They made it through," she said. He crouched down beside her. "They did. I need to take seeds from them before the first hard frost. Put them in the tin box the way my mother did." She looked at the row of plants. "And next spring I'll plant more, enough to give away." "Clara will want some," Caleb said. "Tom will say he doesn't want any, and then he'll take them anyway." Eleanor felt the smile come up again, that unguarded thing she was learning not to manage. "I know," she said. She stood. He stood. They were close, closer than they usually stood, the kind of close that happens naturally when two people have been moving toward each other slowly enough that neither of them registered the exact moment the distance changed. Caleb looked at her. "Eleanor Whitfield," he said. "Caleb Walker," she said. "I have something I want to say." "Then say it." Howe was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, just finding the right words, the way he always did, not reaching for the first ones, but for the true ones. "I came back from those mining camps with $63 and no particular plan," he said. "I didn't expect to ride into Dust Creek that day. I didn't expect to walk through that crowd. I didn't expect—" He paused. "You." He held her gaze directly. "And I want you to know that I'm not sorry for any of it. Not the $63, not the fence, not the ride to Cheyenne, not any of it." He paused once more. "Because it was all worth it. You are worth it. Not as a rescue, not as a cause. Just—" His voice was steady and simple and absolutely honest. "As yourself. As the person you are." Eleanor looked at this man. This quiet, careful, deliberate man who had stepped forward when everyone else stepped back, who had written her name at the top of a contract without hesitating, who had stood beside her and not in front of her every time it mattered. She reached up and put her hand on the side of his face. He went very still. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I know," he said. "I chose this," she said. "I want you to know I chose it. Not because I was grateful, not because I was afraid, not because I had nowhere else to go. She held his eyes. Because I looked at you, and I saw a person worth choosing. His hand came up and covered hers, still on his face. Warm, steady. I know, he said again. I just needed to say it first. You did, she said. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, and they stood like that in the kitchen garden beside the 5 tomato plants, while the October air moved around them, and the mountains held the sky, and the ranch that had been empty for 4 months and then become a home kept being quietly and without drama a home. When he kissed her, it was unhurried. Honest. The kind of kiss that doesn't try to be more than it is, because what it is already enough. She kissed him back. Chang. The following spring, the kitchen garden held 43 tomato plants started from her mother's seeds in a row along the south fence where the light was best. Eleanor counted them on a morning in May, crouching in the dirt with the tin box open beside her and the smell of good soil on her hands, and the sound of Tom Briggs arguing cheerfully with Walter Whitfield about fence post technique somewhere on the east property line. Walter had started coming to the ranch on weekends quietly at first, and then less quietly, arriving with his tools and his improving carpentry skills, and his rust-recovering ability to occasionally be in a room without making everyone in it tense. It was not a simple thing between them. It was not fully repaired, and probably never would be. But it was a thing that was happening slowly, in the careful way that things happen when both people have decided that happening is better than not. Caleb came out of the barn and stopped at the garden gate. 43, Eleanor said without looking up. Same as the cattle, he said. I noticed that. She set the last seed tray down. Tom's going to want some of these. He already asked, Caleb said, twice. He wanted me to ask for him because he thought you'd say no. I wouldn't say no to Tom. I know, I told him that. Eleanor stood up and dusted the soil from her knees and looked at the row of seedlings, small and green and committed to the light. Clara wants 6 plants, she said, and I thought we might take some to Dust Creek. She looked at him. Leave them at the trading post. Caleb looked at her. For your father, he said. He could use a garden, she said. He has the space, and he's been... She paused, finding the honest word again. He's been trying. Caleb came through the gate and stood beside her in the garden, looking at the 43 seedlings in their rows. That's generous, he said. It's just tomatoes, she said. It's not just tomatoes, he said. She knew that. She had known it when she thought of it, that handing her father something her mother had grown was not a small thing, and could not be made into a small thing by calling it just tomatoes. But sometimes you had to call it by the smaller name first to make it possible to carry. No, she said. It's not. She reached out and took his hand. He folded his fingers around hers. They stood in the garden in the May morning. This woman who had been offered for sale and had rebuilt herself into someone no one could sell. And this man who had stepped forward once out of simple decency and had been stepping forward ever since, and the ranch was alive around them, real and demanding in theirs, and the tomatoes were growing, and the mountains were permanent, and the story that had started on a porch in August heat with a crowd's laughter and a money pouch had ended here in a garden in the spring with seeds that outlasted everything. Eleanor Whitfield had not been saved. She had been handed a moment of breathing room by a decent man, and she had used it to save herself, and then she had turned around and built something worth saving. That was the whole of it. That was all of it. That was enough.